everyone. Thanks for tuning in. In today's episode, we're introducing a series of episodes where we have invited politicians from either side of the aisle to come in and give us their points of view on why it seems our country is so divided. It's not our intent to pick a side or to endorse a candidate. Instead, through casual conversation, we hope to uncover the similarities that unite us rather than divide us. In today's episode, we'd like to welcome our guest, a candidate for the 1st District House of Representatives, Drew Williams.
I was Abraham Lincoln in my 4th grade play, right? When we were like, what person do you want to be when you grow up? I've always liked politics, and community service, and that engagement. Again, I've been on every inch of the way.
Yeah.
You know, if there was a moment or a sunset that was going to change someone's life, I promise you, I've seen it in terms of Kentucky. You know what I mean? And so, like, I want to bring that feeling and that ideology there of the peace that we can have if we trust each other and we work towards transparency in systems to everybody's life.
The Keep On Talking Joe podcast. Yeah, I think I nailed it.
I've been trying to tell people, because regardless of what you start out in a conversation, you generally end up with, okay, these things in the world are hard.
Yeah.
You know? And my take on it is we can't have a body that works optimally without a left and a right arm. And right now, that's what we have. We have a body that's trying to operate on one arm at a time,
one side or the other,
or
pendulum,
even competing against one another. So I think sometimes maybe getting to a conversation instead of a debate or an argument is important. And so I think what has to happen is we have to, as a country, start finding what simple thing we agree on. You know, is the wall white? Well, it's off white. Okay, let's go further back. You know, let's find something that we can agree on and then slowly start moving forward.
Right.
And
I think, just building foundations.
Then I think maybe we could understand that we're all really wanting what's best.
Oh, yeah.
We just have different points of view.
It's a big issue of language, I think, and different perspectives coming from different parts of the country that deal with issues at different rates.
Sure.
Right. And so the lack of cohesive understanding across such a large swath of the earth. You know what I mean? Like our country's the size of Europe plus some.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So like a lot of people don't guesstimate that system there. They think like, oh, well, you know, like France does this. It's like, well, France is the size of like Georgia.
Exactly,
you know what I mean? Like, so like,
yeah. So what you were just saying there is, I as I was setting up today, I was listening to Bono. He was on Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan watches our show every episode, so shout out to Joe. Bono was saying just the same thing, that he's fascinated with the United States, and he's like, your country is huge. And that's a big factor in how the world perceives us. So that is definitely something I think we should get into at some point too, because you know, even though we are the one of the leaders in the world, if not the leader, we still have to work somehow with the world we're in, as a whole. So, I think what I'd like for you to do is just kind of give me that kind of beginning sales pitch. You got as long as you'd like to, and then we'll start getting into some of the questions that I have. I know one of the things that I seen when I did a little bit of research was you wanted to bring the working class to Washington, and that really hit home for me because I have several small businesses and I have employees and people that work for me, and we're all struggling. We are all struggling, and when I say that, we're not as bad. You know, there are third world countries that would
it's all relative.
Would laugh at our struggles, but at the same time, we're wanting to be better. So, let's say, as far as local, what are you trying to do, and what message are you trying to get out there to people?
So I've spent the last 6 years, me and my wife have running Tater Day in Marshall County, Kentucky, and my goals before that, but intentionally on that, have been showcasing how community involvement and like direct activism are incredibly important to our systems. Historically, the government hasn't been there before certain social safety net systems or organizations were set up, and churches, private organizations, and individuals were doing the barn raising, we're doing the community service, we're doing that interaction. Tater Day is not a city-sponsored event; it's a community-based event. So when Tater Day started to falter around 20 years ago, it was because of a lack of community engagement with that activity. As we've seen with everything in our society, there's less and less public spaces, there's less and less community engagement and activism. Organizations are dying around us, like the Kiwanis or the women's clubs or the homemakers. All those subjects aren't getting like new blood into it, and that's showcasing as to why we have so many like small town dry ups that are going on, is because people move to just more and more entertainment based or engagement centers,
Mhm.
and that really hurts us. But I think that that's something that we can start to build back, and just in that short period of time that we've kind of been in charge of Tater Day or whatever, we've really turned things around to make it a more inclusive and accessible and cost affordable place. Um, so the goal, in my eyes, would be to bring a conversation to the federal government that could then trickle down into other communities to showcase how we can incentivize or bring a conversation of community engagement back to every area. And I think that's really going to help, because a lot of times we are very passive in the way that we think about how things are affecting other spaces. I always say, like, if you can volunteer, once a month, you can go to 2 community events, and you can eat locally twice a month, you are doing a huge part to keeping your community alive. You know
Right.
what I mean? And that's not much. At this point, I'm telling people, if like you go play pickleball or,
Yeah.
or utilize the library, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you're keeping things alive that desperately need your integration into it. And so I think that's really important, and kind of an aspect that is lost, is like, like, while I have ideas, and we'll get into some of those things, I'm sure, going further into policy, but like there's so much you can do as a community leader in those positions that are just unfathomably powerful, right? That doesn't
Right.
require you to pass a law or get, it just requires you to be engaged and want to connect with your community. And I feel like so many politicians, right, don't get into that kind of the conversation. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's the community based thing. I'm working with a group, an organization that is, I'm trying to think, it's called Servant. Part of them are called Servant Inc. It's a nonprofit. And then there's also Kentucky West.
Hmm.
And they're very based on community activities. And he actually, one of the people running it, does a lot of festivals.
Hmm.
He promotes
Sure.
festivals and things like that. And we're looking at ways to integrate that in.
Yeah.
So this is kind of a delicate situation because okay, I mean, there's an elephant in the room, and of
Hmm.
course, it's not the Republican. So, I just want to make sure that I'm not
Yeah.
connecting anything
Oh,
here.
you're
That
good.
doesn't mean to be connected, but he is doing a lot of the things that you're saying needs to be done.
Sure. Yeah.
Even a thing called the recenter, where you bring in people will donate items that are broken,
Yeah.
lawnmowers, whatever,
Yeah.
things like that. Things, and then hit the recenter will go in, take a look at those things, and decide whether it needs to be recycled,
Hmm.
refurbished, or
Yeah.
moved out. And then on top of that, if it does need to be refurbished, then he will bring in people who need some direction or some abilities,
Hmm.
and teach these people, maybe mostly
Sure.
going to be youth, how to do these
Yeah.
things, and and then giving them a skill that they can use in their own life, and then also, maybe apply into some type of occupation.
Sure. So applying that to a policy conversation, I think that we should all have the right to repair things that we've purchased, right? You shouldn't just be like loaning it out from the company technically, and when it
Yeah.
breaks, you gotta go buy a new one.
I
There should
think
be some kind of system built in that allows us to buy specific parts,
mm,
understanding manuals, getting into those conversations,
sure.
and buy in the thing that you purchased, right? Whether that's electronics, vehicles, technology equipment and stuff like that. I remember in the past we used to have it to where like iPhones and phones had like, repair kits
You
and
could change
other,
the
you could
batteries
change
in.
the batteries. A lot of that's not accessible anymore. And it doesn't make sense to me, and maybe I'm wrong. Um, that there can't be a cheaper, more equitable solution for people rather
Right.
than just buying a whole brand new phone or paying for these like insurance and warranty costs, right? Where you could more than likely the direct conversation.
Sure.
If it voids a warranty, it voids a warranty. I get that too. Like, I mean, I get that they don't want to have to deal with you breaking
Messing
into
something
something,
up.
but that's your right as an individual, right, to
Hmm.
maintain your own stuff. So like now we have a lot more modern cars. We have a lot of management systems in that with big companies in which like the parts or the tools are very unique,
Mhm.
and small time mechanic shops don't have the opportunity to get some of those tools or equipment or schematics right, to learn how to do those things, and so that we're slowly getting smaller and smaller companies that are getting priced out. I guess I would say of or access locked from those equipment pieces, and so
Right.
that's a problem. Um,
I see that a lot too. One of our businesses we have is restoration of vehicles. So
right.
you years and years ago, when you got a vehicle and you got an owner's manual, it told you the type of oil you need, the type of gas you should use, and not only that, but how to adjust this or how to adjust your clutch, things like
Yeah.
that. Now, when you get one, it tells you how to operate this, the buttons and what
Sure.
the
The
buttons
digital
do,
screens. Yeah.
and everything else is referred to your local,
Hmm.
dealer. So yeah, I do 100% see that. Also, not too long ago, I saw where a large company that might have, we'll just say it might have been Apple, um, said that there was a group going there that actually was trying to pass some laws about that, how
Hmm.
that they would have to make the way the phones were designed, you couldn't even access the batteries
Yeah.
anymore without destroying the phone.
Right.
So being able to repair things. So
Hmm.
that nonprofit here locally, I hope it really takes off. They're looking at doing a lot of different things
Right.
like that, very community based, and so that's kind of what you're saying there. And I think that at some point I talked to my wife several. She's not political at all. She can't stand it. She's a lot younger than me. I think she's more your age than.
Yeah.
But we talk on often. She will get she will get really upset about some things, uh, and sometimes I wonder, why she gets so upset about it. And I guess it just comes across to one of her social medias. And I try to tell her. I said we're a small bubble,
Hmm.
and you're looking at big bubbles.
Big conversations. Yeah.
So for us, we have to focus on our small bubble and
Hmm.
make it larger until we can maybe incorporate other bubbles
Sure.
in, and then eventually we become a big enough influence that people will start listening.
Hmm.
I think that's really what you were saying there is starting at community levels.
Hmm.
When we can show that things are changing or things are better or what this is what the community and the people want.
Yeah.
I think sometime at some point maybe we get some recognition and people will see, the people that are in the larger bubbles will
Sure.
see this is where the direction needs to go.
Yeah, I think that like Kentucky as a whole, right, over the last decade or so, has made a lot of strides to be more technologically innovative when it comes to like what businesses and systems we're bringing in. It's made sure that like we care and try to uplift a lot of our community members consistently, and we've showcased, I think, to the country that we're ready to play ball a little more, right? And so that's a great space. I love Kentucky. My when me and my wife got married in 2016, she moved out like to DC for a year and then to Notre Dame to go get post bachelor education. Right, she
Mhm.
has a master's in Greek and Latin literature, and she teaches middle school history. But I stayed here to work in community service and engage and help fund her space right in those
Yeah.
engagements because like I just can't imagine really leaving. I
Yeah.
think that it's really like like God's paradise in a lot of ways. Now we've got a lot more tornadoes recently.
Yeah.
That's changed some things. But obviously until very recently, it's just been such a wonderful place to be. And I think that it's important to get other people outside of Kentucky and our space to understand like what we bring to the table. A lot of times things are stereotyped for all people, right? We have our own stereotypes of what we think about like
Absolutely.
California and New York and how they behave and think, and they have their stereotypes of what they think about us. And
Sure.
I think that internet connectivity across all these social platforms is really helping break down a lot of those barriers. Not saying that it's not having its own issues that it brings up, obviously. Um, in creating its own new bubbles, right? That
Right.
where certain conversations have more leeway, where beforehand they were definitely just more shut down. But I think that over time we're going to find more things that we align with, like nationally as a conversation, because we can see other people's issues and their plights and what they go through. So yeah.
Well, yeah, I 100% agree with you on that. Even if you're just going back to Tater Day,
Hmm.
you get those stereotypes, and
Sure.
people will come in and will like, "Hey, we got this festival called Tater Day." They're like, "Potato Day?" I'm like, "No, Tater Day.
Yeah.
It's from a back." So, you know, and then they start giving you the whole Kentucky,
Yeah.
stereotype. But you're
Yep.
absolutely right about the world getting much smaller
Mm-hmm.
because of the internet and social
Yep.
media. People are, there's a an understanding that there really isn't a group of people, an area that isn't being touched worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing we were talking about before we started was news media
Sure.
and giving you the sound bites. That's
Yeah.
about all people were getting. And now anybody in this
Mm-hmm.
country just about has access to more than the entire world has ever had
Oh,
access
for
to at
sure.
any given time,
Mm-hmm.
So lots more education being put out there. But at the same time, we get a lot of stuff that it's hard to trust.
Oh, sure.
You don't never know. You
Mm-hmm.
never know. And the silly thing is, you can compare it to is you now when you see a celebrity die, you're like, well, I'll wait around.
I'll wait
I'm
around to
not
see that.
sure,
Yeah.
and that's kind of the thing across the board.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like that's going to cause issues with campaigning and the trust that people have on what they're hearing?
So I attempt to put everything out in a very long form and personal style. I have worked really hard my entire life, really, to be somebody that's upfront and not judgmental and available emotionally and empathetically. So I'm hoping that when like the political conversations and the misinformation start to kind of come out, more people are more empathetic and understanding towards what I'm trying to achieve and the conversation. I don't attack any things. I'd rather act like I am running against people saying they don't want me in office rather than running against an opponent. Right? It's about the policy and conversations we can put forward and ways that we can move together. Than about saying that I hate this or this is terrible. Obviously, there are things that we disagree with. I mean, like that's going to come with the territory. If we all like we're if we conformed to our own beliefs, I mean, we all had the same exact thought, we would not move forward as a country. This is why we're able to survive and move and engage. Um, so I'm hoping that when people find information that they think is faulty or hard to understand, that they reach out to me directly. My personal phone number is on all my content right
Mm,
now. Now, once I get elected, I'll probably have to get another phone for my personal use because that number, which I've had since the seventh grade, will be my public number for everybody to bother.
sure.
But that's kind of the conversation is that like anytime people ask me questions, I don't try to skirt from it, right? We're going to have things that we're not going to agree with. I'm hoping that people just understand that I'm willing to take in information. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I'm happy to admit that. I'm happy to like humble myself and say I'm sorry if like things that I've advocated for or policies we passed have inadvertently hurt people. I think the town hall conversations and like being available consistently are very important and probably should be standardized. It shouldn't be something that we're like hoping that people get engaged with.
Right.
It should be something that we like. That's what you're going to do as the candidate because it's also more egalitarian in the sense of the like when you're running for office if there are more scheduled town halls, more scheduled debates, it gives people without, the working class individual who has to go to work half the time they're campaigning, they get a
Exactly.
chance to be in front of people in a more standardized way that doesn't require campaign donations. We want to get money out of politics. The goal is more egalitarian systems of political engagement. And so, yeah, I think that hopefully uh, people will put down their ideological pitchforks in the conversations, right, and be able to pick up more of a ideological or like a philosophical book of it, right? And we can have like what we're doing here, a conversation about systems and come together
Yeah,
in a way. Again, we don't have to capitulate any kind of values, but we can take steps to understand like, oh, this would be a good starting spot.
exactly.
And yeah, misinformation and disinformation are rampant. I mean, it happens on both sides. I mean,
Absolutely. Yeah.
the outrage machine is going very well for the media, and so like it's just trying to be very stalwart in bringing forth a conversation of like unity and proper debate, decorum. I mean, again, we don't have to agree with everything that's happening.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I agree with you there, and
Hmm.
I think we were talking. I don't know that if we were recording this, but before, in my personal opinion is the country as a whole has to act like a body with two arms,
Yeah.
and those two arms have to cooperate together to make the body optimal.
Yeah.
And we're not seeing that, and maybe because we start again, like you were saying, we don't need to start at the debate
Hmm.
side. We don't need to start with the argument. Let's
Yeah.
let's find a common ground and
Yeah.
then build from there. because once we find that common ground, that building from there
Sure.
will then make us realize, oh, we're not that different.
Oh yeah,
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 you know.
yeah. I was talking with some people about the 2022 Langford's border bill, right, which was sponsored by a Republican, right? And a lot of the bill, most people had a really good understanding and grasp of like why it would be beneficial. But there were a few things, there was like two or three things in it that both sides had some differences and issues with, right? And then eventually it didn't pass. But we like the fentanyl detection, the increase for asylum judges, conversations of like getting that system engaged was really bipartisanly agreed upon, except for like one or two things. And so it's weird that when we group all these things together and we say, well, this all has to pass all at once or it won't ever pass at all,
Yeah,
then we just realize that like all this stuff that could have incrementally improve the situation that we're all concerned about,
right.
right? None of it happened, and now we're just playing the blame game of who's at fault. That this awesome
We're still
thing
having
didn't
this
happen,
problem.
and
Yeah,
we still have those problems. Yeah, and as we see, like I mean, and both sides have done it. We've passed 1,000 to 5,000 page bills, that are impossible for anybody to read. You know what I
yeah,
mean? And so like it's just important to kind of take a step back and realize that like policy and conversations probably need to pass on their own merit, like as small of a conversation as possible,
absolutely.
and that'll and it's easier for us to understand it as the public,
Yeah.
when
Well,
it's 6 pages or 10 pages,
speaking on that, it's very frustrating for someone who's not, at the level of looking at every detail on it,
mm-hmm.
and you're seeing things that are just you're like almost sneakily trying to
Sure.
get something that may not even have really hardly any bearings
Mm-hmm.
on the actual the
Mm-hmm.
topic, trying to get passed through. And I don't know how or what we would have to do to get that changed.
Sure.
There is, I guess, there's going to be a certain group of people who are like, if we don't do this, then we're going to be stalled on every little detail of
Yeah.
everything. But somehow we got to. I definitely agree that we need to be able to move forward on the big topics
Yeah.
when we agree. That's very irritating that a country so divided could actually agree on a big topic, but
Yeah.
because of all these little stragglers, we can't move forward on
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I hope that we're able to figure out a way around that.
I would really love for a day where like they got all of like the House representatives in the room and they just put a bunch of whiteboards on the wall, and we start at the left and we just started like we put a topic up there, and just start spitballing words, and then we all kind of keep going across the room until you figure out what we actually concur on, as a
Hmm.
conversation. And it would just seems so much more amenable to movement. You
Right.
know what I mean? To get everybody's fresh opinion, as well as the fact that like a lot of times we rely on, like let's say you have an elected politician, they utilize their judgment as a conversation, sure, to make those votes. But like really, in the terms of like being a statesperson for your constituency, like if I disagree with my constituency, at the end of the day, I should probably vote what my constituency wanted. It's my job to convince them that like maybe we all have it wrong. And so like really we should advocate for people who challenge our beliefs and viewpoints, right? And because like I would constantly we want be wanting to come back down and be like, "Hey, this is the information. Like, can we concur? Can we change opinion? Can I take a step forward for you all?" Because like then if we don't agree, then I go up there and I vote the way they wanted me to, but I say like, "Well, this isn't how I feel, but this is how my constituency feels."
Right.
And that's what we move forward with. And I'll go back and try again. You know what I mean? Like as a
Right. Right.
conversation. But like when you have the majority group putting the majority group's headliner into conversation, like they don't really have to like to compete against each other's conversations. And so like when you don't have to challenge belief systems and structures, you're not giving like that system a chance.
Right.
And so like I think that's really interesting. I think that again both sides should take a chance on breaching that. Um, like when we have the we obviously we have 3 elections per election cycle, what I mean, because we have the governor's and executive branches in an off year for Kentucky. But when we have the down ballot races, I always try to pick someone on the opposite side of the ballot, because how am I going to argue? I mean, hey, you don't have to be the top of the ticket people, and I get that, right? Like,
Mhm.
but there's been, every election that we've had candidates available. I've tried to pick someone that isn't my ideological like favorite,
Right.
but is someone that I respect and that I trust cares about the situation. And we got to work together, because like, how am I going to ask you to do the same thing if I'm like, oh, I'm an ideologue and my ideas are 100% factual and 100% true all the time,
but I don't
And
want to talk to you about it.
but
Yeah,
yeah, I don't want to
exactly.
tell
I
you
don't
about
want
it.
to.
Yeah, I don't want to hear any of your facts,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
systems.
That's
Um,
that's a great way to look. I say to attack that for sure.
yeah.
I So I have one of my children. They are talking. Just got out of high school, and they're talking about possibly being interested in politics. And I'm like, that's it. That's great. That's
Hmm.
great because I think we're seeing, less interest there
Hmm.
because it's frustrating. I can imagine being frustrated being a politician
Sure.
nowadays. I told her, I said, you got to be careful though, because some of the experiences that I've seen is politics is a little bit like the mafia,
Yeah.
you know, because what happens is you need these people and you need their finances to be able to compete with other people
Hmm.
who have the same
Hmm.
things. If you don't have that same ability, that same financial backing and support, so then you'll start to say, well, you'll be have good intentions, and then eventually you start to, well, I'll give a little bit here
Sure.
so that I can get what I need to really get my main thing ahead.
Hmm.
But by the time you get to the point where you
Yeah.
can get to the main thing, you've already diluted yourself
Yeah.
so much, and you've given up so much of yourself to everyone.
Sure.
It's hard to do.
Yeah.
Do you do you see that any differently or in a different light, maybe?
Um, so obviously the status quo of the way politics is today and with the people we have today, I don't see them having a conversational change. What I would like to propose are a few more like kind of out of the box ideas, but I think that's kind of what we're in the mood for is more out of the
Exactly.
box ideas. Again, back with the town halls and the organized debate structures. I would really wish that we would play like a more standardized version of like TV or radio ads timings where it's like 1 hour on Friday at 6 p.m. We're going to do the presidents. And next week we're going to do the Senate races, and they got two 30-minute blocks, that they're going
Right.
to talk to you at. And or maybe we're going to ask city council candidates in your area questions, and that's where their ads are going to come in. But otherwise, you don't need to see those ads. You know what I mean? Like
Mm,
24/7, back to back, every minute of the day. That's every one of those costs money. Every one of those ads costed them
for
money,
sure.
which is again, it's an issue in the sense of like because we're relying on like per chance catching of those ads that they have to play so many, and then the people who don't get the natural funding because they don't either have baseline connections or they don't have capital of their self or a capitulation of their values in
Mm,
order to get that money, like you just said, they end up not getting the amount of exposure.
sure.
Same thing with like I'm a really big proponent of the campaign dollars that you raise having to come from people who you're going to be on the ballot for. So like it's really weird that you have people from like outside of your district or even outside of your state
Back in you.
backing you,
Yeah.
like the weird conversation. And so an option to me would be to like federally raise money for all campaign options, but then give you like an EBT card technically, and maybe you got $50 total over the entire election, $10 to spend for president, 10 for Senate, 10 for House, six for whatever's coming down the pipeline. Just I'm just using random numbers.
I
Obviously,
understand.
we can come up with an amount, but if like in January you got 1/10 of that amount of money for the presidency, that's a dollar, to spend on any candidate you wanted. You know what I mean? Like you can spend that and it's in the treasury, which is a big issue for like so I'm freshly running, right? And I've ran for office before. KREF, the Kentucky version, so much better than
Yeah.
the national version of election financing so far. Much more modern. But what I would say is that like if all the candidates were ran directly through the treasury, this money would just go from one section of the treasury to the other section of the treasury. You would have a debit card and a checkbook, and there's so many steps for running for office.
I can
There are
imagine.
so many steps.
Yeah.
And that's kind of ridiculous that if you want
Frustrating.
people, human people, to run and keep their jobs and keep going, until they get elected, which is a huge issue. You can't just like not everybody can just quit their day job to go run for office.
Right.
The goal would be to streamline a lot of those conversations and make them simpler. But if we did that kind of allocation, then when you went through the factor authentications and you donated your dollars, both you would know that if you didn't spend them by November, you lost them. So like why wouldn't you get involved? You have 50 bucks to spend. You have the same 50 bucks everybody else has. Nobody can
Right.
spend more than that, right? And like again, it could be 250 or 50 or whatever. That would just create a scale of how much tax dollars.
Right. Yes,
But then
sir.
the more people that would be engaged, sure, it would cost more. But isn't that what you want is that people are engaged? And so if we're saying like it's worth $50 for every person to get involved, You're
Right.
saving because we spent $24 billion last year on elections, from city council all the way up to the presidency, right? Just
Yeah.
all of the elections. So like if 200 million people, which is 45 million people more than voted, spent $50, that'd only be $10 billion. So it'd
Right.
be cheaper to give everybody that kind of conversational, and you could scale it. Again, you could pick what amount of dollars and how much pressure they wanted to be able to give. But then if we went through and did like I don't like the mailers. Mailers have a big issue. They're super cost inefficient, and obviously they have all kinds of misinformation and just blasting on them.
Sure.
If we did like a candidate brochure that came out with every candidate during the primary and every candidate during the general, right? And just gave you like a one pager that you could put your information on, and that came out at no cost to you as the candidate, then everybody would have equal exposure through that system. You could pick up an additional copy at the city hall. You could look at that version online, and it would be it would be more egalitarian towards all the candidates and save money. And the goal is to make it to where it really doesn't cost money to run for office. It's your exposure and your issues and how well you're performing. Because if you as an individual can give money of your own volition to all these candidates, well, then the candidates that don't have any worth are gonna die out. They're gonna
Right.
fall out because they won't get any individual sponsorship from the people. You know what I mean? And right now, it's just how many connections nationwide do you know that can
Yeah.
drop
Well,
$2,900, which is the primary or general election cap, or find a bunch of other people who can do that same thing for you across the country. And
yeah.
so like that's a whole big weird system.
Yeah. It goes back to like what I was saying, a little feel of the mafia. I know a guy. I
Yeah,
know a guy.
and so, like, that's weird because, like, I think that everybody, like, the poorest individual to the richest individual in your community should have the same amount of importance.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Because, like, obviously, the richest person in your community is creating a lot of capital, they're doing a lot of work, they're getting a lot of benefits. The other person is suffering, you know what I mean? And they need their viewpoints taken into consideration as well. And so, not saying that campaign dollars are what should account for why you're important. That's 100% not the case, but it definitely helps pull some of that energy towards people who don't have the capital to be able to spend, because $10 to a presidential candidate when you don't think the whole system works at all anyway,
Right.
it's a waste of time.
Sure.
But now, like in January, you might look at all the candidates, and you got a little bit of money to spend or whatever. And then
Yeah.
in March after or May after the primaries, you're like, oh hey, I want to do something else again, and I get again involved,
Hmm.
and learn these conversations because you have money to spend.
I gotcha.
Yeah. And so like this is kind of the again out of the box idea. But some states have implemented that at the state level. I think Washington has. And obviously, every system's not going to be perfect. And then some countries have that kind of conversation as well. So again, just things to learn from, as well as the goal of making it a more conversationally egalitarian system for candidates.
Yeah.
Um, is probably the long term goal, and we can see that as being more worker focused, people centered. Um,
Right.
yeah, and
So
transparent.
I did a little research on you, and I seen you were a math teacher, and your math teacher,
No, my wife is.
your wife's a math
My
teacher.
wife has
Okay.
been a math teacher. Yeah, yeah,
Okay. Well, I could see a little bit of math teacher coming out there in the
yeah,
beginning of that with
yeah,
all the
yeah.
numbers. So excuse me for that though.
No, you're great. Yeah,
There was a math teacher in the
yeah, yeah,
family.
yeah, yeah.
Out of the box though. So I've had a couple of others. I've had a city council. I've had a judge executive. Unfortunately, we lost some of that when she's
Hmm.
coming back. People here, and they were both very, very young. When I say very young, not actually, more like your
Hmm.
age, I'm assuming. But they're they're the changing of the guard,
Hmm.
the new ideas and
Sure.
things like that. And we're talking about out of the box kind of things. How realistic are we there? And I'm not
Sure.
trying to,
No, yeah,
I'm not even
100%.
being a devil's advocate.
No.
I'm really curious. How realistic is it that we're going to be able to make any significant changes? Before you answer that, the reason I ask that is I see this in lots of different areas.
Hmm.
So I've often said that one of the most discriminated groups out there are the poor.
Hmm.
You take any race, a young man who is obviously poor, you put him in a convenience store.
Sure.
And everyone else is overlooked, but they're keeping an eye on him.
Yeah.
And the same thing if someone drives by here tonight at 100 miles an hour,
Hmm.
breaks the same exact law, but one of them is a multimillionaire and
Yeah.
one of them is a minimum wage,
Hmm.
who's going to get represented better, who's
Sure.
going to have a better outcome. And we're seeing that, as you were saying,
Hmm.
in elections. And I mean, if I decided that I wanted to run
Hmm.
for any,
Yeah.
I would be. it would be a laughing stock because of that connection
Sure.
base. So, how likely are going to see change? Do we have a process? You did say that some other um, maybe states are already trying to implement some of
Sure,
that.
yeah, and again, a lot of that is going to be language conversations from the way that we perceive the states that are implementing policy changes, right? If we disagree with like their generalized ideology, it's obviously a lot easier to see that we don't agree with like what they're trying to implement, right? And that's kind of plays off on different systems, especially here in more of the South area where we don't see so many even liberal, like more leftist hotspots inside of even city structure spaces. Um, I think that things are possible. I think that more young people on both sides of the aisle are willing to have a long form conversation about issues and to come to real solutions. I have plenty of Republican friends who agree with the policies and conversations that we're addressing. And there's a lot of bipartisan systems that we engage in. Again, it's going to be people getting elected who don't have to give up their community in order to get elected, like taking those dollars or being in a space where they have to um, side with like the loudest voices, all the time, in order to get elected, right? We
Right.
have to be able to speak with people or about people or to people that um, don't give their voice a lot, who don't come to the fore and say what's wrong about their plights. I know a lot of times, like I grew up in Marshall County. It's a very homogenized community, right?
Mhm.
Very very similar structure. Now wealth inequality and other things obviously striate that, but mostly in culture and systems, it's very similar. And so, like when I see a lot of issues that happen nationally, I usually just take them at face value for the issues that those people are fighting for because I don't have the experiences or the connections or the conversations to know any better, first off. And I also look at my own life and see how reasonably good it is and how much this area, while we're kind of left behind economically in other ways from both the state and the federal level. Um, like I mean, again, I love living here. I love the space that we're in, and I think that the people who live here enjoy being Western Kentuckians. You know what I mean? And so like it's interesting that when we really enjoy the space we're in, and we don't deal with as much of that kind of like need to take to the streets or call out an issue or have that conversation, and then we question when other people rise to the occasion. And it's just like that's interesting to me, because like I don't like personally, like again, I'm happy to go out and stand for other people's injustices or rights or American liberties and whatnot, but like that those aren't happening to me. You know what I mean? Like I don't feel like that's happening in my space. So like I wouldn't mistrust other people saying that that occurred. My initial outlook is to believe people until they prove that they're untrustworthy. I don't think that the whole world's untrustworthy and that there's an enemy around every corner. That leads to us again not even trusting our neighbors, let alone people who live on the other side of the country or the other side of the world. And again, like we said, with everything kind of speeding up, like we're becoming a more globalized economy, globalized internet and social structure. The goals will be to like long form is to have a prosperous and friendly relationship with as many people that we can. And yeah, it's really hard to get like some of the more um, new or unique ideas through like congressional or legislative appeal. I think that it's never going to happen if you don't put people up there whose like goals are to run on those things or to put those things forward. A lot of people sign like the petitions for like term limits, but then like they're always saying they'll be the co-sponsor, not the sponsor. You know what I mean? So like if somebody else brings it up, I'll bring it up. Like I'll sponsor that. Um, you know,
Right.
you could sponsor it. Not saying it would ever get passed, I mean, like you put it up there, but you could also just personally adhere to the term limits that were given. Like, I mean, like I think 4 terms is pretty decent. Freshman, sophomore, junior,
Yeah.
senior out.
Yeah.
If you'd like a year of alumni where like on Friday that the
Mhm.
previous congressperson gets to call you for an hour
Yeah.
and say whatever they want, and they're like the back home constituent representative. I mean, that's a cool way of like building up, the bench of conversation so that people have that onboarding and we're not trying to just like attack each other and then leave, and I hope you do a bad job,
Right,
because it's
right,
not me
right.
anymore. But that would really help enliven the conversation of like what people can do, and how people can get involved. So,
Well, I'm trying to keep some
no,
notes
you're
here of
good.
things that I want to come back to, and I do want to take a little bit of a circle out to this because there's some really good points there, and I want to touch on them again. Um, I think the global thing is something we need to talk about a little bit because of different. Well, we'll get to that, and then you said something about issues, and I'm just saying this out loud as a kind of for
Hmm.
you to get prepared for some of those things, um, and then we'll talk about and then bad jobs. So the bad job situation, that was one too that I want to circle back to eventually before we're done, and that's where you get one person gets elected and someone else loses, and now they're hoping that
Yeah.
they do what badly for the country that they live in.
Yeah.
I told you so kind of thing. And that brings me to the point that I want to say. We when we first started talking, I
Hmm.
said I want to keep it local.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't really want to get into the
Sure.
big thing, but I would like to bring up this point that I've said a couple times because it does bring it to a local feel and that bad job thing. So the State of the Union,
Hmm.
as far as I know, the last State of the Union, and this is one of these very down the middle feels here.
Hmm.
So I think that the current administration have done some things, pointed out some things, brought some light to some things
Sure.
that needed to be done. And the current vice president, however anybody feels about him,
Sure.
one thing that he did before he got elected that made me feel a little better about him was he was on a podcast, Joe Rogan. And by the way, Joe Rogan watches our show.
Yeah.
And Joe asked him a question. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was a big one.
Hmm.
And he's like, I don't have enough information for me to talk about that right now, but
Sure.
it sounds like something I need to be more
Hmm.
informed about. And that gave me more of a feel of genuineness.
Oh, for sure.
I don't want someone, when I asked them and I would give this advice to politicians because and anybody who's trying to convince somebody of something to be careful that when someone asks you questions, you don't just kind of regurgitate
Sure.
something you've heard
Yeah.
or because it's an easy thing for people to pick up on, and then
Yeah.
immediately they'll be nodding their head and saying, "Oh yeah," and they're like, "This guy's full of shit."
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not listening to this no more.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's to be to humanize a group of people. I think we got to be able to feel
Yeah.
that what you're feeling is true, and if you don't know if you
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't absolutely, and also on top of that, one thing that I liked that you said was if you can show me where I'm wrong or
Yeah.
show me a better
Please.
way,
Yeah.
you know you're what you a person that is in the position you're wanting to
Hmm.
be in, I would hope wants what's best for the country,
Yeah.
not just what's best for them
Oh, yeah.
themselves. So that was a point that I wanted to bring up that with okay, and going back to that State of the Union, I mean, there was some valid points
Hmm.
that the new administration has been able to accomplish. Now, let's say I'm not going to speak on whether those
Sure.
accomplishments were from the old administration
Yeah.
and just got the point
And that happens every time,
right,
right? Like we
yeah,
all take accomplishments and systems from
right,
other ones to make the spin towards the conversation
sure,
because of the football game that we're in.
right,
That's just
but
that's just how it is.
my
Yeah,
point
yeah. Hmm.
was that the other side of this the building would not and they got some really bad press for not acknowledging these
Sure.
things. They wouldn't clap
Sure.
for something that was a situation that
Yeah.
had been and they got some bad press for that. And then but here's the thing, and I'm not picking sides here, but the other side would almost feels like to me go um, this is what we've done. It's so amazing and great. Ha ha.
Yeah.
And how can we do that as a country? How
Yeah.
can we bring because we need that side of the building too.
Yeah.
We
Oh,
need both
100%.
sides.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to be like that, I think that maybe we should say my administration has done a great thing here.
Yeah.
You were part of it.
Yeah.
Regardless whether you're my administration or not, you are a part of
Yeah.
it, and this is what we've done as a country as a whole.
Sure.
And with these policy moves, and then you could go back to building yourself back up,
Yeah.
but not reaching across,
Oh,
not
100%.
but instead throwing rocks
Hmm.
isn't
Yeah.
going to do any good. And then at the same
Yeah.
time, on the other side,
Mhm.
not going, "That's valid." You
Yeah.
dig and sometimes we have to if that side is throwing rocks,
Yeah.
sometimes we still have to stand up. I and again, I'm
Oh, sure.
this
Yeah.
guy, you know,
No,
I don't
100%.
I'm not really trying to choose a side or anything, but I'm just in that situation, both sides had an opportunity.
I think that it's really important, even when you disagree with the overarching conversations engaged, right? That if you find specific instances, or even like, I don't think that maybe the thing we did was exactly the correct way. There are some modifications I would have made, but like obviously this is what got passed or what has been happening through like executive order or actions. Um, but I understand the intent, right?
Mhm.
Like just like that's all you have to do. Like I think that there was better things that we could have done with the executive order on modulating the pharmaceutical prices, right? A lot of countries that are poor or low population are probably going to have an issue because the prices are probably going to go up there rather than come down so much here, because they just have to be even, right? That
Mhm.
was the goal. And so maybe we should have said that we have to be like 1.5 to 2 times as high as other countries, because currently we're like 2.8 to 4 times as high as other countries. So like, yeah, we need to bring it down.
Right.
But the things that we really need to focus on maybe are like a cap on essential medicine prices per dose in the United States. That's basing it on the United States, not comparing it to other countries.
Right.
And so, like, I agree with the premise of what we brought forward. I think that maybe we have some disagreements on the overall direction and the implications of where they're going to be affected.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean that I disagree with what they're trying to engage in. I also thought that the concert ticket conversation was a big one that I can agree with. Again, I'd like to see its implementation and stuff like that. But I think that the concert ticket gouging that they signed an executive order on, the resales and all that,
Right.
big, right? Like, I mean, that's something that people deal with. That's not like devastating, but it's a part of entertainment life and stuff that's stopping us from going out and
Right.
enjoying ourselves at a reasonable rate. Same thing with like the cartels, right? If Mexico's given us permission to help out militarily with taking out cartel conversations, I'm for that. Obviously, with Mexico's approval and conditions, I don't want to be there, illegally. But like that's something that we should be doing, right?
Mhm.
That's a solving of the immigration crisis at the border that we can deal with that is bipartisan. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so like yeah, those are good conversations. It's finding something that you can agree with. Again, I don't have to agree with everything or the direction or the tone. Again, because I think that sometimes the tone is very aggressive. I try in everything that I'm doing to be very moderate. Um, Personally, you know what I mean? My whole life is kind of a lot about moderation in that sense. I spent a lot of time working outdoors. I immediately go inside. when
Right.
when I'm out of the sun, out of work. I don't need to go
Exactly.
to the lake on the weekend. I'm there all week.
Right.
Uh, I can be
I
done with
definitely
that.
agree with you there.
Yeah. So I think that that's kind of where we have to go is to humanize and give a level of dignity to the people that disagree with us,
Yeah.
even when they don't show it back,
Mhm.
because that's again like on both sides of the aisle, all kinds of philosophical teachings and religious conversations talk about giving everyone grace.
Right.
And so like no one should be working like there's so much time on social media where you're like somebody will make a point and they're like you're an idiot. Like, well, what did that do? Did that make you feel good? And did that bring up the conversation at all?
Mhm.
No, it didn't. It just made us all enemies. You know what I mean? And that's a weird thing to do. Like,
Yeah.
why do you feel that way towards your fellow person? Like, more
Yeah.
likely we're all Americans, even. Like, you're not even talking to somebody from a different country.
Sure.
Like, where's the patriotism in that? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like denigrating your fellow person because they disagree with you. Like,
Yeah.
that's the whole point of being here.
Well,
Yeah.
and that's definitely the point I was trying to make was the
Mm-hmm.
tone needs to
Yeah.
change on both sides. So what I kind of how I see it is that a politician,
Mm-hmm.
because I guess because I always look at things from business
Sure.
perspective. A politician is a salesperson
Mm-hmm.
that I, as a voting citizen, am trying to hire.
Yeah.
I'm trying to hire a salesperson to get my point across to others and try to convince them
Yeah.
to buy that product.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's,
Sure.
whatever I want to do. And a good salesperson doesn't attack, the other people that are trying
Yeah.
to bring in. I think we change that tone and we come in there with a little shade more diplomacy that we could maybe,
Yeah.
especially, I've done a lot of sales in my time, and complimenting
Mm-hmm.
the person that you're trying to get on board
Yeah.
is a good thing. So yeah, point out some of the things that this side is doing
Yeah.
that is moving us forward, while at the same time showing that
Oh,
so maybe
100%.
some of the ideas that we have on this other side is this. So
Yeah.
the tone is essential.
Sure, and like again, like a lot of times in the way that we engage the two sides of these conversations, there is a form of language that people can get involved in the way that they describe their goals or how they want to move forward that can be mutually beneficial. You know, what I mean, like
Absolutely.
there are things again, like we talk about in these different conversations and bills that are very bipartisanly supported, and then we just run into like three minute issues or one big thing, that's going to be harmful, and then it all comes collapsing down.
Right.
So yeah, it's again taking everything with a little bit more humility and grace. Understanding you're not going to get everything you want every year that you're in it, and obviously, like as we see with like the infrastructure bills, or with like the Medicare for all proposals, or with like the one big beautiful bill that's come out, like they're like 10-year plans, right? Like that's a conversation over a long period of time that they're like determining. But a lot of times we don't see inside of those bigger conversations, like what's happening this year.
Right.
Like, what's the plan this year for what we're going to see? What am I going to see immediately? How are things going to be affecting us right now, day to day? Um, Instead of just giving us a more grandiose conversation, right? That's probably a little bit more simplistic and easy to digest, sure, but I have a really hard time because a lot of people on different sides of the aisle think the other side has no intelligence whatsoever. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And that's really weird. There are a lot of really smart,
It's
intelligent, compassionate individuals on all sides.
it seems numerically impossible.
It seems so
Yeah.
weird as a system for us to have that level of like, oh, well, this side is just like all sheep, and they're all just following the same lines. Like I've yet to get an email from this like of like what to do in any campaign formatting from the national or state party, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's nobody's contacting me on like what I'm supposed to rant like specifically do anywhere.
Right.
So that's good.
That's a good
That's a
thing.
good
That is
thing. Yeah.
absolutely good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, yeah, no,
Yeah.
I haven't, and again, we're way out from the primary. I'm hoping that they really don't, kind of, you know what
Mm,
I mean, like because that would showcase, a level of decorum that they have on people bringing up their own issues and the conversations from their people. Obviously, there's like national and state party platforms that people generally adhere to, but like that's the whole point of two big tents is that like, you
mhm.
have a lot of wiggle room, or you should have a lot of wiggle room. The purity tests from both sides are like abhorrent. You know what I mean? Like if you don't believe a 1,000% in all the things that we have a conversation, and you're not this, and you're not, you don't follow me, and that's really weird. We're all on our journey. We're all trying to understand things better. You know,
Right.
to act like somebody's like irredeemable. I mean, yeah, there are certain interactions, right? But like not like a vote. You know what I mean? Not like like I'm taking one stance on one argument, but like I agree with you on seven others.
Right.
Like I don't need you all to come to every conversation that I have right now and think, oh yeah, that guy's got all of it. You know what I mean? It's just that you
Right.
trust that I'm here to learn. You know what I mean? Like that I'm still a student, that I'm just a servant. You know what I mean? Like the whole goal is to be able to be in front of you as much as possible. You know what I mean? Instead of this situation where we just have to really just side with the organization that works for us the best. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And then the other side is just can we say how awful they are and
Right.
get you to like be worried that they're going to ruin everything if they get in power. Um
Yeah. I think that's a common, we talk about the two sides. But really there is a third side, and
mhm,
that side is this like why, I like some of this, I like some of that,
yeah.
but there's no strength there. There's
Mm-mm.
no strength in that. There's not
Sure.
going to be an independent rise up.
Sure.
So that being said, if and then when I started telling people you were coming in, of course the area we live in, at one time it was, primarily, I remember my dad when I was younger, Democrat, Democrat, Democrat.
Yeah.
And you've seen a huge shift here lately. But the especially in the area I live in, people that I know, they're like, well, but he's a Democrat.
Sure.
Well, okay, what's the point of that? I'm not wanting to hear Democrat. I'm wanting to
Yeah.
hear what Drew
Yeah.
had to
Sure.
say. And if that was the case, and I want to talk to those people that said that and people that think that, if that's the case, then what's the point of having individual people?
Yeah.
Why not just have one individual who knows everything that the Democrats stand
Yeah.
for, and one individual, and that's
Yeah.
only Republican, and just have them talk for everybody?
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
Because they're not. You're if you think that away, then yeah, there can't be any change. So saying that, I'm a little curious with the two parties. Is how does the parties make decisions
Mhm.
based on policies, and do they change those decisions,
Sure.
and do they, you know, yeah. Let's just ask. I guess that's the question.
Sure.
You know, because of one party, they may change their views or maybe a
Hmm.
policy at
Well,
time.
so if we look at it historically, obviously when the like Civil War conversation comes up, right, and that shift, the South was Democratic, the North was Republican, right? The North was more liberal, or like the North was more liberal. The Republicans were more liberal. They were more big government at the time. That's why they were the carpetbaggers, and they came down from the North after during Reconstruction and did all the things, right? Um, and so that occurred and was the system of engagement up until the 1930s during the Great Depression, where FDR switched to being more big government New Deal conversations, passed a whole lot of executive orders, really engaged the federal government in priming the pump, and the Republicans, as a switch of tactics, went towards more small government, states' rights conversations, and so like there was a big switch. Again, we get back into like moving forward. Both groups are relatively economic based, right? But I'd say that the Democrats have become a little bit more liberal. And then moving into the 70s, as we solved a lot of the economic situations from the 50s and 60s going forward, we really had the heyday of the American dream. Democrats tended to move towards more social issues as the economic basis was getting stabilized. Um, and then obviously we've just kind of gotten into our current scenario now. Again, in the 90s, Democrats were much more harder on crime, right? So like and bigger on the border. And so like every group moves and joins around. I'd say that Republicans currently are a little bit more big government. There's a little bit more federal overreach coming from their bills on like what states can and can't do,
Right,
right?
right.
We're seeing a shift now in that conversation of like where different parties are seeing those things. Personally, for me, I consider myself like a liberty Democrat. I want to fight for all American liberties. I've never fired a gun, but I'm here for your Second Amendment right.
Hmm.
That's a big thing to me. I know that like in Kentucky, we can't, like the state has chosen to not enforce like gun licensure and concealed carry. I'm happy to do those things for free. You know what I mean? They shouldn't come with a
Right,
cost. That's a amendment tax, you know what I mean, to engage with if I'm hoping that you get those trainings. So I want you to get the trainings,
right.
right? Like we all want everybody to get the trainings,
Yeah,
but we don't want it to cost you. That means it's pretty much just a free firing lesson. You know what I
sure.
mean? Like you get to fire some free bullets now if you go get the training. I'd love to give you the thumbprint lockbox scanner if you finish those trainings for free. Just like
Sure.
$125. I think every American would feel pretty decent about letting you have your loaded firearm in a thing next to your bed,
Right.
untouchable, except for by you. And that's not taking anything from you. It's giving you something, and it's showcasing that I support your rights,
Yeah.
even when I'm obviously on the ideologically other side of the aisle, and I'm not capitulating my values in the sense that I want gun safety reform. But I, at no point in time, want to have a conversation about removing firearms that you currently own or other situations. Same thing with like registering firearms. Currently, it costs money to register the firearms. I'd like to give you $25 to
Yeah.
register your firearms, because then people who might need the money or might have a whole change of hands in that situation aren't penalized technically for that situation. They're incentivized to do something, and I think American governments do better when we incentivize things than create punishment schemes.
Mhm. Well, that's a big topic too, the
Sure.
gun
Yeah. Yeah.
laws,
Yeah.
and and I mean, I would every single gun owner that I would know would be like, I'm not registering my gun.
Yeah, no, that's great.
And the reason they do that is because we go back to the trust
Sure,
issues.
100%.
Why are we registering a gun? Is it
Yeah,
so that the government can come take our guns,
sure,
or is it because that when someone's pulled over, they know that this person has a weapon and they're
sure.
not, or and I could see many different reasons. So we all goes back to that
Hmm.
trust
No,
issue
yeah, we have
again.
no trust in the government. I don't have trust, and I have a healthy distrust of my government, right? Like,
Right? Yeah.
that's a fair thing to occur in, especially in like the more bureaucratic areas of that system. Like whoever is currently in office doesn't have step by step control of each agency and system from the federal to the local level.
Right.
We're definitely like laws have to be passed and changed to engage in different scenarios, right? Like just because you go from one administration to the next doesn't mean border security is changing this week. You know
Right.
what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's going to be months in changing, and then we'll have to see statistical data on that. And so like I agree with you, and that's why I would love to have those conversations. I'd love to run a like why don't you like me tour across the
Good
district,
idea.
and specifically asking people who don't agree with the policy conversations. Typically, like just because you're like you're a Democrat, I don't like you. It's like, okay, well,
Hey, listen.
why don't you like me? Because I think it's really rude and disrespectful to all of us to not give candidates who put their time in the chance in conversation to make their appeal.
Right.
Like if you don't give it the chance, because again, you're thinking one side's going to be, well, then that side's going to be corrupt eventually too.
Yeah.
If they don't have anybody to hold their feet to the fire, if they feel like they're super comfortable. I mean, we have House representatives and senators who've been there for 44 years. Like
Yeah.
and the House representatives have to get elected every 2 years. That's 22 elections that they've been
That's
successful in the same position.
yeah, that's an amazing track record,
That's
right?
an amazing track record. You have to have been well loved or in a completely
Or well
well
backed.
locked
Well
area. Yeah,
backed, yeah.
well backed area. And so like it just doesn't give the ability and communication for like that competition that America really thrives on to bring forth the best ideas.
Yeah, I want to make a note of that too because I'd like to talk to you about the new changing, how things are changing going
Hmm.
forward here on in the next part, um, and how confident people are that have not, they've been in the office for
Hmm.
40 some odd years. Well, I like to bring that up next time we on the next, and then I'll also you were saying that you were pointing out how different parties switch from one thing to another. During you were showing demonstrating that through different decades. I want to know how they make those changes. I want to
Sure.
know how the Democrat Party, the Republican Party sit down and go, okay, guys, we're going to start making a shift here.
Yeah.
Okay. And maybe we can get to that. So we're going to take a quick
Yeah.
break,
Sounds great.
bathroom, water, all that. And then the question I have
Sure.
is we see the debates
Hmm.
between, well, I guess we do see some debate between parties whenever they're showing, say for the who's going to be vying for the
Hmm.
presidential, backing. But on another level, is there another level of how parties decide when they're going to make some adjustments or shifts into the? Is there a newsletter?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I wish
yeah,
that there was a open conversation about that. I'm sure inside of the national committees themselves for like the policy platforms, not the not politicians, but then within the caucuses themselves at the national level, they probably develop a lot of that conversation as to where they want to go forward. And really it does seem more opportunistic, right? It's about like seeing the future landscape and groundwork and what you have to do in order to maintain a level of political power over the conversation, and what is able to be pushed forward at different ranges. Um, uh, it's unfortunate in that
yeah,
regard. I think that we should be advocating for what logically, rationally, and factually makes sense and works. We should be okay with trying something out, seeing that it doesn't work, being able to own that, as well as move forward without a level of judgment and trying to make sure that it fails. You know what I mean? And so like it's gonna be, I think, a whole new set of stipulations we're gonna have to put into the people we hire for those positions. It's not going to be something that's just going to come out of the groundwork. And so like again, the way that they change their policy positions definitely seems to be more about like the groundswell of support they have within the people in their base, which probably makes sense. You know, what I mean, like if the
sure,
base is talking about a whole new issue, and they register and identify as Republican, then that's what the Republican Party should adhere to and gain with. The Republican Party and the Democratic Party shouldn't put forth ideologies and try to like push them down the pipeline to make sure that people agree with them. It should be more of a response system. Now, whether or not that's the case, and or they have their own backers and their own designs in space, is probably its own rabbit hole to get into.
yeah,
I've worked in Democratic politics since 2013. Um, I've helped door knock for multiple governor's campaigns, presidential campaigns, stuff like that. But you know, besides like some like 2 hour trainings and getting their brochures, right? Like they don't even give you a lot to go up to the doors to talk about,
yeah,
let alone being able to like really focus and shift that information into an actionable conversation for both sides. And that's just how that works. There's just like we're just now getting to where we can do like you can send somebody out with like a Google Drive worth of information. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
Beforehand, it was like you had to have a big pamphlet, or a big binder to get that kind of information in front of every single person. Now technology is helping a lot, but it'll be really interesting to see how well we adjust to like the more world based information system. Again, we know so much more about what's happening in the state legislatures and in the national governments across the ocean, and like what policies and systems work or like are at least available as a conversation. And so that is going to change a lot of things. Like a lot of European countries during times that they're not at war or like major issues, they give parents in the military the option to choose their deployment times. We don't do that here in America, right?
Yeah.
Again, that's in non-war individuals, right? Like they would be transitioning back and forth. But like, could you choose 3, 6, or 9 months? After 6 months, do we give you a little bit of a stipend bump because you're away from your family that can go towards like the upliftment of your children, so that like yeah, you're not there, but like there's a bigger monetary benefit adhered to your kid in the absence of you, like trying to build that up because military families are like the backbone, of every part of our rural communities.
Sure.
And so we have to be able to like organize systems around them. Well, we have other countries and other like interactions that showcase ways in which we don't have to take the exact format and formula, but it'd be nice to take something,
Yeah.
that showcases that we care. You know what I mean? Like those things are going to build up morale. And so, there's just small things in looking at data and trying to take a factual approach to it. It doesn't have to be left or right. It just needs to be forward,
Yeah.
so.
So I want to go back
Hmm.
to one thing we were talking about, and that's basically the changing of the guard.
Hmm.
I think that's maybe kind of the theme of this podcast when I've
Sure.
been talking to politicians or people in leadership positions. Not definitely for my entire
Yeah.
podcast, because we do a lot of different things, but I've seen that, and it's going to be, a lot. I'm seeing a lot of people will talk, it's very hard because, like you said, some of these people have been in positions for longer than the people who are coming up
Yeah.
have been alive.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know what the answer is there, but to see some change, I don't know how we're going to go about it, because I do know that the world is watching us
Hmm.
and they're seeing two countries, in
Yeah.
my opinion. When the world
Sure.
looks over at us, they see two separate countries.
Yeah.
And even though we live in the same communities,
Yeah.
we're so divided.
Hmm.
Um, how do you see that changing of the guard happening? We were talking briefly about your campaign and the challenges that you face right now, and how
Sure.
you're looking at that. But where when you're looking at campaign funding and things along that line, are the younger generations just going to have to kneel down
Hmm.
and bow down and follow suit to be able to step into those positions, or can we actually see some change and some different ideas come into to Washington?
Sure. I think that if we all agreed to a no incumbents rule for one election, you'd probably have a whole different conversation. That'd
That's
be the
yeah,
easiest thing at
sure.
the public level everybody could agree with, right?
Hmm.
But I've known so many people that have worked in polling elections, like they've done the election day work. I love doing election day, but I know people that have done that for years, and like when they come in to vote, that even that day, like for the primary or and whatnot, they won't know other candidates besides the incumbent. And I'm like, but you work the polls. Like, how can we expect people in their day to day to know the primary candidates,
Right.
that were running against Mitch McConnell, right? There was like 4 or 5, and people were like, "Oh, I didn't know it. I didn't know any of their names."
Yeah.
I was like, "That's an interesting conversation, considering there's so much data available of just who's running, who's filed, anything at all."
And it's
Um,
very accessible
it's
now.
very accessible. It's not being hidden at all. It's just one side's gonna or one person maybe in the primary or in general gets a lot of money and they get to own the airwaves, and so it's really difficult. I think that we're getting better and better, and I advocate for this a lot. Like, I mean, door knocking and phone banking are really cool, and they've worked historically, but a lot of people don't answer their phones. I mean, and mass texters are expensive as all get out. Uh, but the neighbor to neighbor networking, like you talking to people that trust you, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And then being able to give those people that are your supporters, like the policy information and arguments that they can just share with that person instead of having to make the debate themselves. There's so much information coming out right now.
Yeah.
There's so much content in the news. Like when I build policy and statements, it's for 2027, which
Right.
seems kind of, like off point for today and like the what we deal with. But as a civilian, I can't do anything until November of 2026 or January really of 2027, if I got elected. And so,
Yeah.
these need to be evergreen conversations or things that can be modified, right? Like again, I think that we definitely need some incentivization to move like rural healthcare providers and people into those or urban healthcare providers into rural spaces, right? Like we don't provide them moving assistance. We don't provide them tax breaks like after they've been there for a certain amount of time. We don't help them with like the Medicare, Medicaid payments and compensation rates, right? That those areas are desperately going to need because that's like again a higher majority of their people. 40% of the people in the first congressional district receive Medicare, Medicaid, right? So like it's a huge portion of individuals who use that as their health care. The more we expand their access ranges and points, the higher their health, the greater their economic output is going to be, the greater their generational health benefits are going to be. And that's important. And it should be intrinsically important, regardless of the economic output and value, right? Like everybody's health and well being and mental health and stability should be important, regardless of how well they're able to contribute. But that also has its own monetary values and system benefits, right? If areas in rural communities have higher levels of education, higher levels of health, they are better workers, they're better members of society and productive. We can build and move either transportation out of that area so they can temporarily work in more urban areas, or we can move facilities and systems into their communities, right, that help out with that. And provide or healthcare provisions and businesses in rural communities is a huge part of that economy a lot of times. And so it's really a self-sustaining model of engagement, and we need to utilize a lot more of it. So yeah,
Yeah. So talked about a lot of different things there,
sorry about
but
that.
that's so no, that's good. There's a lot of things to talk about,
Yeah.
and that's why I like the long
Mm-hmm.
format because I see the media um, get those headlines, and well, they want you to talk for just long enough they can get a big headline.
Sure.
So they can throw it out there, but if you discuss it and explain it, and they're like, "Oh, that's not what he meant," well, that doesn't become as exciting
Yeah.
as that. So I think having this sit down
Sure.
helps a lot.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk to you. Okay, so you were talking about the rural healthcare
Mm-hmm.
and things like that, and I was kind of wondering. So those kind of changes when they go in, uh, well, okay, I guess I wanted to make the point of if you are now running and you're trying to push that, and then 2 years from now, that's been kind of handled. So
Great.
yeah,
Right. No, I mean, and
yeah,
that's the
but
big goal.
but it's hard for you, like you said, to campaign now on some
Mm-hmm.
topics because those topics are being conquered on
Yeah.
a yearly,
Sure.
hopefully
Yeah.
basis.
Yeah. Yeah. Again,
So
that's the goal, right?
you're in a very general area right now where
Mhm.
you're just kind of saying this is how I feel about everything, and
Yeah.
as things change
Yeah.
and the importance becomes more important or less,
For
you can
sure.
shift.
So my goal, I think again that everybody is able to understand and digest all of the information that comes down in conversations of policy. I think that it's just that some people have a better ability to like mentally construct conversations and like diagrams in their mind about things. So sometimes when I'm talking to people, it kind of just goes right over their head in the sense of like we're speeding through it and there's a lot to
Right.
talk about. And I respect your time. So I don't want to slow down and try to just get a few points in. I'd like to give you as much as I can of me. And so I build infographics. You know what I mean? Like just short, like picture images with
Yeah.
the statements of like a very specific bill, like say like a ban on Congress people becoming lobbyists after they leave. Right? It has
Right.
a few little stats about like how what their average salaries are afterwards. It says that we like this is what we want to do.
And you have those already made up?
I have a lot of
Are
those
they
made up.
avail
They're
are they
going to
av
be available tonight on my website. So
okay.
like that was the goal. I got the
So,
website and everything up.
let's make
It's
sure that we put that on this
yeah, and
but
so the goal is to create bite-sized conversations that like if you shared the Google Drive that had all those infographics in it and somebody's like I like business and there's like 12 business different platforms You don't have to like all of them. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? Like these are just different forms of conversation. Hopefully, we pass any of them. You know what I
Sure.
mean? Like that would be fantastic. It's a whole to just run on like two platforms, to just have like like a paragraph statement about like what you believe and not how what you want to try to implement, to not showcase like research a little bit behind why that's important or why that makes sense to you, seems a little disingenuous, or that you haven't taken the time right to really put some unique thought into it. You don't have to come up with all those ideas on your own.
Yeah.
There's hundreds of people, thousands of people running for office across the country, and there's historical value of specific conversations that have happened. Utilize it. Have a real conversation with people, because like no offense to the whole world, like I'm really good at having a conversation, to be in a debate, to try to bring up information kind of in an unbiased way, to check myself and whatnot. You open the hood of a car, I'm
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
idiot. Like, I mean,
Sure.
totally. And so
It's
like and
understandable.
so like so many people are really intelligent in the subject fields in which they engage in daily.
Yeah.
No, we shouldn't expect everybody to be experts in politics. We don't want everyone to be an expert in politics. We want
No.
you to trust that the people you send up there are going to work for you, and they're going to work to create a system that works for the majority of the people in the community, as well as those who are being left behind and marginalized in that same community, right? And the better we do at supporting those people in a grassroots way, right? Like we were talking about earlier about like campaign financing and whatnot. Like if you support a candidate and you share their posts and you talk to people, you do that neighbor to neighbor networking, you convince 10 people over the course of a year. That's more than probably $10,000 does in most campaigns,
Yeah.
in convincing 10 people. And
That's
so like the effort that community members can do to change their environment, if they're willing to talk to the other side, they're willing to talk to detractors, they're willing to keep their head, and understand that like people are coming from a place of emotion and fear and worry about their families. Like most people are not coming at it from a place of hate. You know what I mean? Like both sides. Everybody thinks that everybody hates each other, and like the outrage machine again is just rampant. And I think that a lot of times if we just take a step back, we understand that the vast majority of us, I'm not saying all of us on either side, right, are there in good faith, but most of us are there in good faith. 90% of us are there in good faith. Can
yeah.
we understand that like when you look across the aisle and you see somebody and you look them in the eyes
Sure.
and you care about them you agree that you care about them as your neighbor just as much as everybody else. You know what I mean? And that's hard for people to do when we've spent so much time over the last decade just ripping into each other.
Yeah. So I think that's something that so it's like, when I get on an airplane, I don't care really how much my pilot knows about politics, but I
Yeah.
want him to really
Oh,
know how to fly an
100%.
airplane,
Yeah.
and that's kind of what you're saying. But at the same time, I think it's going to be a challenge to educate your the people that are already on your side,
Mhm.
because they not only do you as a candidate have to be able to reach across
Mhm.
and try to make concessions. If they're going to convince other people to change,
Yeah.
they're not going to do it by insulting them. They're not going to do it
Mhm.
by just bringing up argument
Yeah.
after argument. They're going to have to reach across and say, "Hey, let's make this better."
Well, and what I've definitely tried to point out to people who've kind of been more hardline on specific issues is not that you again have to capitulate or give up values. And again, you don't have to like say, "Oh, well, I'll let this detrimental thing happen to get this minor good thing to happen." But like you could make the logical argument right outside the door of where they believe. Like knock on their ideological door and say, "Hey, do you want to come out on the front porch
Yeah.
of your house and talk about, maybe a step somewhere in here?" And once you showcase, like, again, both sides, once you showcase that there's some wiggle room, that there's some understanding and conversation, people drop walls immediately. Like, they are so much more willing to be like, well, I'm actually a little bit more conservative on fiscal policy. I mean, like I think that the debt and this, that, and the other, or they're like, oh, I think I'm a little bit more liberal than portray in X, Y, or Z. That's why, like, when I say again, like, 4 terms for congressional officers, well, for Senate, that's 24 years, right? A lot of people come out and they're like, well, I think it should be less than that. I'm like, good. I'm taking the conservative stance. It's
Right.
currently infinite. I'm not going all the way to 1 term, you know what I mean? Which would be the high, most progressive stance. I'm taking this one. So now that you've corrected me and said it should be further than that, you've crossed over me on a conversation, which shows that we can have some compromise and that we don't always sit in a box
Yeah.
of whether or not we're conservative or liberal or Republican
Yeah.
or Democrat. Like it's such a bad guise. Now it does help with an uneducated basis or of constituencies and like, oh, like the red button or the blue button means me. Like I believe that. And that's been helpful, maybe. But like for down ballot races, I've ran for city council a bunch of times. If you hit that red or blue button, you don't vote for me at all.
Right.
You don't help any of that race.
Yeah.
So like
Right.
the fact that those things even exist on the ballot, the
Yeah.
fact that D's and
Yeah.
R's and I's and all that exist on the ballot is really, really weird.
I
It's
think you're
definitely
right.
built in a way that was supposed to help the party that was in power at the time.
Yeah.
And so like we could definitely agree that that's probably a bad system and we should come at it from a more educated perspective, especially when pretty much all of us are advocating that we are the most educated out of the two groups.
Sure.
Then you should have no problem becoming more informed about the candidates that are running and their policy positions, and taking a more nuanced approach to how you believe in things, because if your beliefs are true or valid, then they'll hold up to scrutiny,
Yeah.
and you shouldn't be offended when people challenge them, because they need to be educated, and you
Sure.
not taking an aggressive stance will leave them more open to learning whatever truth you think exists in the world,
Right.
and so yeah, it's really interesting.
So I try to, because of my as I get older, my short term memory is a little
No, yeah.
off. So I make all these notes of what, and you're the first person I've switched pages on so far, because you have so many things that are like, oh man, that's great. I want to talk about that. I want to talk about that. So I'm going to try to hit a few of these here. One of those is the DNR. Okay, I think you're right about one thing, is that was there to protect the current,
Hmm.
but also I think that's the one thing that the two parties will agree on, is they don't want a third party.
Oh, sure.
And I think that's why that's there. There
Yeah.
is no DR
Hmm.
in, question mark. There is
Hmm.
just DNR, and I think that is one thing that they have done well
Hmm.
together, is to keep an additional
Yeah.
party from coming into
Yeah.
play. So
Y-
if we could start there, maybe.
it's interesting too, because if you look at like super PAC and PAC contributions, sorry, to different people, they are on both sides of the aisle,
Yeah.
which means that specifically, and not in every instance and not on every case, but like certain candidates give up that conversation for a specific level of money, again, like we talked about, towards specific values that they're willing to give up in order to gain their ultimate goals.
Right.
And so the two party system is definitely one of those unique goals that they have, in which, without doing like ranked choice voting, without doing some of these other conversations, they've allowed themselves to have kind of free reign about it. And sure, they go back and forth, but there are people at the top of the conversation who are consistently benefiting. We notice that, like how like the more technocrat individuals in our society um, switch based on what's popular.
Yeah.
I mean, like the social media sites and the
Absolutely.
conversations, they switch as it becomes more popular to be over here or over here, which means that they probably don't have any political value alignment. It's mostly about whatever is going to enrich their conversation the best. And so, like, we just have to be salient of that, and note that, like, again, certain states have tried to do like proportional electoral college voting, right? Like, so like if like I think it's Nebraska and Maine.
Yeah.
There's two states. I think it's the two. And so like each state currently has one. I think Maine has one Republican electoral college vote that it usually gets, and Nebraska gets one Democratic one. Right? It just showcases that like those people in that space matter. You
Right.
know what I mean? Because like in Kentucky, 30% vote Democrat in the presidential election, and there's six Republican electoral college votes. They get all six. And so
Yeah.
like there's not like even like a break point of like you get one. You know what I mean? Like to
Yeah.
showcase like that your value sets matter and are being represented across Kentucky. And that would happen the same thing with California. California gets 52 blue votes,
Right.
you know what I mean? And they could at least get 30% of those votes to be red. You know what I mean? Like as a representation. And so like even if we're not going to direct popular vote in that conversation, like states can engage
Yeah.
that way. And then like with ranked choice voting, if you wanted to vote for the libertarian candidate in the presidential election, but if the libertarian candidate didn't win, I want to vote for the Republican candidate, then that
Right.
that allows you to take the chance without ruining. You're not holding your nose, you're just saying, well, it's this list. Well, in that list, if you're a Republican, the Democratic candidate might be last on the list, but they're on the list now.
Right.
You've agreed that they are somewhere on the list, and you might like the Democratic candidate more than the Green Party candidate. So like they're now fourth on the list instead of fifth, and oh my goodness, look, you have even more things that you agree with that party than you thought. You know what I mean? Because
Right.
there's further groups and conversations, and instead, right now we're just ignoring it. We completely debase that from our
Yeah.
conversation and the way that we can be more nuanced. And they don't want that, right? Like they don't want us to have these good across the aisle reaching conversations where we're actually saying things and actually understanding that like we have good points to make and intentions, because it doesn't sell. I mean, like there again, someone somewhere is making a whole bunch of money off
Exactly.
of this,
It's money.
and yeah, it's just money. And so the whole money out of politics game and engagement is important. I think that like both sides always have the issue of like stock trading inside stock trading. It's like, well, from the moment you start running till 4 years after you get out of office, you shouldn't be allowed to trade. Your stock should just be frozen right before you sign up for office. Pick your stocks,
Yeah.
because if it's not an Acorn account, you probably shouldn't be able to mobilize it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
That's a pretty strong statement there.
I
'Cause,
mean,
yeah.
it's easy to do though, because I
Yeah.
mean they're getting a decent paycheck. I mean it's a big paycheck for me. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
absolutely.
Like,
But
but for maybe a lawyer or a big doctor, yeah, sure, it's not like the hugest paycheck in the world, but like that should, if money is a motivating factor for you being in office,
yeah.
you don't need to be there.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit because I think that money doesn't buy happiness, but it'll buy a boat. You
Yeah,
know that old
yeah,
saying.
it definitely don't hurt.
Yeah, and people, I'm there's a one of my favorite movies, and I'm a big movie buff, so I'm surprised I haven't used any of those yet. But one of my favorites is Aviator, and it talks about Howard Hughes, and it shows a scene where Howard Hughes is sitting at I forget the girlfriend he had, one of the anyhow they're a very rich family, and the mother is talking about how different things, and Howard starts talking about his business and
Mhm.
flying planes and building and money and investments and things, and the mother says, well, we don't see money as important, and he says that's because you've always had it.
Yeah.
And it's real easy, and I see even people that I look up to in podcasting and stuff like that, and they're talking about how similar, and even some of these people came from very modest
Sure.
beginnings.
Yeah.
But when you're, for me,
Yeah.
I'm a small business owner, and
Hmm.
it's an everyday struggle
Oh, 100%.
to keep it going. And for me, when I've got to make payroll on Monday, there is nothing I'm more working on than that,
Yeah.
and so it is extremely important.
Oh, sure.
Now let's take a look at that, and we look at these people who's been in office for over 40 years,
Hmm.
to not to think that money's not an issue there, because this person, let's draw it back, let's say 20 years, now all of a sudden they've got a new occupation, they got their job is they've been fired essentially and have to restart.
Hmm.
And unless now, and then if we were to maybe counsel some of their abilities to do trading and things, yeah, their wealth could be dramatically affected there
Yeah.
too. So there's a little bit of a complication there, and then too, we got to look at you know how many people are coming into politics, because
Hmm.
we talked about that briefly. That who wants it? I mean, honestly,
Yeah.
who wants it?
I love it. So it's
And
just fun.
I understand,
Yeah.
but when you look at it, and the like you said, the amount of money that can be made
Hmm.
as is
Yeah.
compared to the inflation and things that are going, there's a certain amount of wealth that we want as an American.
Hmm.
And when I say that, I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm saying that we want to have a life that we can provide a
Oh, 100%.
service
Yeah.
throughout the time, and then when it's time to retire, we can be comfortable and have
Yeah.
things in place. So, yeah, those are some tough topics, but especially for these people who have been in office for so long.
Yeah.
I think they're really hanging on to that, because what are they going to do? What are they going to do when they leave? They're not going to be able to, I mean,
Well,
possibly.
so a lot of them get like non-active board member positions on committees and spaces that they may have helped benefit in the
Hmm.
past. So like I had like one of the infographics I have is for like the revolving door of contractor policies and systems, that like the benefits they get for providing federal contracts to specific companies with the intention of kickbacks. So like a lot of them come out pretty decent right now. Now, again, if we put those stipulations on them, I don't think that they're going to be impoverished by any shape, form, or fashion when they come out of office.
Yeah.
That's not the case. Again, if we use that alumni conversation from the term limits and we give them like a minor position for like maybe $30,000 for 1 year,
We're
you know
paying
what I mean?
for the
We're
experience.
paying for your experience to keep messaging us to be that representative back in town. Maybe that's your onboarding amount that you need to get back into your professions and systems. It's a little kickback, but we're really drastically reducing the overall opportunities that they have for that kind of a conversation. Same thing with like, there's a bunch of there's a lot of things they can't do in terms of like article writing and media appearances where they can receive money, but they can receive money from books, right? And book writing, which is why a lot of them have like ghostwriters and they produce books about like their political experience or their life or whatever. That's cool, but like, can 80% of it go to one of the pre-approved charity lists that we build, and you can keep 20% of it? Then go wild in that regard. Now that
Yeah.
you're giving so much of it to a charity conversation, right? And you can keep building. Um, a lot of times, again, we talked about the lobbying issue and Congress people becoming lobbyists because they have all these connections inside of Congress that they have already made, and so like obviously they'd be the opportune person to be a lobbyist. Um, and like you don't want to ban lobbying because like where John Stewart like fought for 9/11 firefighters to get their just compensations, he's a lobbyist in the moment that he's doing it, right? So you need lobbyists to advocate for the most marginalized grouping of people. But if you've been a congressional officer, that probably needs to be pro bono. You
Yeah.
probably don't need to get paid for your lobbying efforts. There are other people who could probably step into those roles and get paid. It doesn't have to be you. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And again, we look at like the way that we do kickbacks and the way that of like you're a family member, right? Receive like a high paying job in a specified space that you affected, right? Maybe everybody's job for like 10 years in your family and close friends has to go through like just a little ethics panel. If it's over $500,000 or $1 million, I mean, I don't care what the number is, right? Like
Yeah.
that's up to the decision, but like maybe they need to just be like, oh, hey, you actually had like a big hand in creating this company. Obviously, you would get this job. Great.
Yeah.
Next, you know what I mean? Instead
Sure.
of like right now, we have both sides of the aisle arguing that family members are receiving special benefits and systems, at the highest levels of offices. And that's a huge issue for both sides. We can bipartisanly understand that, like, we don't want that to occur. We don't want people to get systems in which they weren't the person that should have been put into that place.
Right.
And so, there's just a bunch of different conversations there that I don't think are stepping on the toes of what it is supposed to mean to be a congressional representative.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be a livelihood. Honestly, if the amount of money that you receive decreased every year that you were there, it would probably be pretty nice.
Yeah. That
Start at 200,000 and then go down 20,000 every year until you're out.
yeah, definitely an
You know,
incentive to move on.
yeah. I mean, we shouldn't be promoting you to be there. In the 1800s, for the duration of the 1800s, the average U.S. House time period that people spent was 3 years. So
Yeah.
two terms really. The average right now is 8.6 years.
Right.
Right, so it's over doubled in that time span. I'm not saying that there's not really egregious offenders of that, but like most people are there for like 5 terms. You
Okay.
know,
So so many things there that I'd like to say,
yeah,
that I'd like to get involved with, but I'm going to shoot this one out here because this is a little devil's advocate kid.
go for it.
These guys who are in these positions and they're like, after 4 years, I've just now got the ball back rolling the
Hmm.
right direction, and
Hmm.
now it's over. I
Hmm.
need another 4 years.
I hear
I
that
need
all the
I
time.
need another
Hmm.
4 years after now that we've got to go in the right
Hmm.
direction. I need another 4 years to secure
Hmm.
the situation so that it
Sure.
doesn't get off track again. And
Yeah.
now I need another 4 years to prepare someone else.
Yeah.
So what would you say to that?
We should be immediately bench building upon the moment we get into office. You should be finding individuals in the community and the spaces that agree with the policy position that you're going to go forward. You should find people who are also running for office or already in office at different ranges. So again, like if there was only 4 terms that you could be in there, right, and that's 8 years, and you're a junior in Congress, you should be finding a freshman somewhere else from across the country that's got elected that supports your policy position as well and building consensus so that they will continue that on once you've left.
Yeah.
Because like it's not about you. Why is it about you? You know what I mean? Why is it about the politician? If no one remembers my name once I'm gone, that's fantastic. You
Well,
know what I mean? Like that's just a weird thing to like be like, oh, I gotta have like a building named after me or the bill's after my name. Usually, if the bill's named after you, it was either super influential or really bad. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
like it's just really important to note that like that level of hubris isn't why people should be getting into office. In fact, in ancient Greece, that was something that you could get exiled for, and the house is representative of the Greek model of
Mhm.
governance.
Yeah.
So like people who get up there and do that is counterintuitive to the whole goal. I feel
Right.
like of why you're there. So yeah, it's really interesting on that regard.
Well, also, in my opinion, it shows a lack of forward movement
Hmm.
because every day the old get less. I mean, they die out. I mean, as
Hmm.
you get old, I mean,
Sure.
it's
Yeah.
just coming. You're going to get older, and you're going to start to die out, and then there's new people being born every day. So as we go through this timeline, you're seeing, a certain groups of people that were they were influential in a time that was completely different than the time we're in now.
Yeah.
And the people in that time needed things and wanted things and seen things completely different
Oh
than the
yeah.
needs of what we are right now. It's similar to say that, you put someone who built a Model T and you allowed him to be the only person that has any influence into how automobiles are
Yeah.
going to, and by the time he gets here now, there's a completely different need.
Yeah. Sure.
So yes, thank you. So that's something I'm really concerned about. I'm at an age where, I guess should be stepping up into leadership positions and things like that. But at the same time, I try to, and I push this in most all my podcasts that next generation that's getting the flack.
Hmm.
I married someone much younger than
Yeah.
me, and I had children already. So my children range from 25
Hmm.
to 18 to 8.
Yeah.
So I got
Hmm.
multiple generations
Yeah.
there. Every single one of those generations are getting hammered with being lazy, with being soft.
I'm sure you've seen like the videos of people going historically back in time through like
Oh
newspaper
yeah,
articles,
and,
and they're like, "This next generation doesn't want to work," and it's like in the 1800s talking about the 1830s generation,
yeah,
and it's just
and
like
they're
we've always thought that this generation, but that's the goal, isn't it? Is that like the people eh, ahead of us that we plant trees for that we'll never sit under the shade of
very good
have
quote.
a better life and they understand like and I agree like so my wife's again a teacher and I have a lot of teacher friends and they talk about how a lot of kids currently don't have the hard skills of like sitting in a chair for 8 hours pretty much or like writing all the time, right? But they have the soft skills in the terms of emotional development, of critical thinking, of trying to get engaged and like understanding like bigger picture conversations. And so what I really think is like obviously again we're always looking at these things on this pendulum swing. And like it's got to be, we're either all the way over here or all the way over here, And so like the goal is to find a way now to marry those two conversations of like all these hard skills that we used to have with like being able to take back breaking labor and we had children out in the fields and whatnot and soft skills of like our kids are very well emotionally developed hopefully and they understand emotions, they don't mind having them and being able to have these long form conversations and like really get into who they are as a person and being able to create a very resilient individual who's able to bring the best of all of our worlds together. um Instead like we're arguing like obviously that like they're taking cursive out of schools and like I agree that cursive is important but maybe penmanship in second grade instead of cursive because I can't read their manuscript right now. So like penmanship would be great. In high school, it would be really awesome in grammar class to have cursive because that would be like advancing the conversation, right? Instead of trying to teach two separately different writing styles to early education systems, right? Like I would rather have a class on social and emotional learning development so that kids aren't coming out and feeling like they don't have the like nobody understands me and nobody gets me and like the depression rates in this country are huge because of social media access and other conversations. You're not going to solve all of that. I have just as hard a time of keeping the tablet out of my kid's hand as every other parent right now.
If you're like me, yourself as well.
Yeah.
I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
yeah, I
And so
mean,
like
and
we're
and what should we be keeping those tablets and phones out of their hands as much as we think we should? Because again, we're going back from a group of people who I love. I
mm-hmm,
love the great generation.
mm-hmm,
I was at a memorial for my father yesterday.
mm-hmm.
You talk about hard.
Oh, hard.
There's
Yeah.
no harder man than
Mm.
my dad. It's just hard, hard. But at the same time, I have to give him props, and I do it every single podcast. The most non-judgmental.
Yeah.
He's a big old monster of a man, paving crews. I got his
Hmm.
cap there. Just you look at him, you just think you would stereotype him, but he was the most non-judgmental
Hmm.
person that I've ever met. He would just listen to what you had to say, and well, he said, "That's interesting. Tell me more about it." You know, he
Yeah.
didn't. But I'm sorry getting off topic because it was his
Yeah. Yeah.
memorial
Yeah.
yesterday, a very emotional day. Um, but we're looking at the new generations, and they have not only do they have a different world that they're going into.
Hmm.
You know, you need to like how many times do I hear, well, boys don't even know how to drive a stick shift anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I get it. There is a saying that says hard times create soft men and
Yeah.
soft or well,
So yeah,
just
it's not been
I'm
creating
getting
hard
backwards there.
times.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I get that there could be a shift, and
Sure.
there needs to be some of those things known. But at the same time, most likely what we're seeing is technology is not going away,
Yeah.
and having a cursive is important.
Hmm.
But is it as important as knowing how to navigate AI or navigate these systems that we're going to
Yeah.
be using within the near future?
Well, and a lot of times, like most businesses and spaces, they can teach you a skill, right? What they can't teach you is interpersonal communications, like
Yeah,
in being a good employee, both in the work sense, sure, having like good work skills and whatnot, but like being able to handle criticism, being able to be in a meeting with a bunch of people, being able to digest all this new information. A lot of times, like when you come to like looking at like doctors, right? Information comes out so quickly now that it's not about like what information you learned in college. You learned the skills and the subsets to like do the surgeries and get done with your residency, but like how much information can you pick up? Can you read these journal articles and understand the new medicine that's coming out daily? You know what I mean? Like it's not like we're having like monthly or yearly conversations. We're having daily updates and breakthroughs with medical technology. How fast can you deal with that? You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like that's what makes people a really good doctor in a lot of ways nowadays is like the way that they can deal with patients, the way that they can handle new information. Now, again, like like we said with AI and stuff like that, more and more of those conversations are becoming automated. So it's really like these high level statements and conversations and mental systems that we have to develop. I really think that like math class should be more like logic class. And yeah, there's going to be a lot of math in it, but like some kids really hate math and then they don't learn logic based conversations for their brain development because they don't like the math part. But like you can do all kinds of puzzles and systems in that class, break at the monotony of just learning straight number math and really push those kids forward in a way that would be beneficial to their adult life. You know what I mean? This is we're not trying to create well-behaved kids. We're trying to create well-adjusted adults. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like, and sometimes my kid pushes back and presses boundaries and stuff like that. But like, that's important to understand and
yeah.
realize that like their conversations have consequences or that like we can talk things through, or that you can deal with someone who like I was walking with my kid the other day and the cat was following us behind and he's like, "Why is the cat yelling?" I'm like, "Oh, it's just stupid. It doesn't know." He goes, "We don't call things stupid." And I was like, "You're so right. I'm
Yeah,
so sorry for like using that negative language on the. I mean, the cat's doing the best it can. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like it's not intentional that it's behaving the way it is.
yeah, yeah,
And so like
yeah,
yeah, that was
Tristan.
that was my language, and that was a kid teaching me something that like obviously I shouldn't have I shouldn't
Yeah.
have engaged in. That's just yeah.
Well, I tell you, because I've got such a diverse
Hmm.
age group of children, they all teach me something
Yeah.
pretty much every
Oh, I
day.
bet. Yeah.
I try to leave a little there for them, but um, okay, so again, you throw in a bunch of things, and education is one of them. I am a firm believer, and now I will let you bash me on
I'll
this
go
one
for it. No, this is
because
gonna
I
be
know
fun.
you have a teacher at
Yeah.
home,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so you can go home and say I whipped his butt on
Oh,
this
that's
one
funny.
because he said that, and I was. But my take on education is the current education in this country
Hmm.
was developed by a group of very wealthy business owners,
Sure. Looking
long
for
time ago.
factory workers.
They were building employees,
Yeah.
and that's exactly what I think they're doing. And as an employer, I can understand it
Hmm.
because we want them to show up on time.
Hmm.
We're going to give them a few minutes to eat, and then at the end of the day, they get to go home. And
Yeah.
then if they do it long enough, we'll let them have a bass boat.
Yeah.
Okay, and they can retire.
Yeah.
And then some of these things that are put into our country as far as healthcare and things like that. Well, that's keeping your tool
Hmm.
that you've created here in
Yeah.
good working
It's a reason
order.
why dental just now kind of came onto conversation. They're not worker bones.
No, they're not
You
at
know?
all.
Yeah.
Right, right. So, I see that a lot, and then that has put a lot of kids that, again, here I come back to Joe Rogan where he said, I was just not in a position when I was in school, it did nothing for me
Hmm.
because my brain didn't work like
Yeah.
that. I needed to be up and
Yeah.
moving. And then I can even, somebody else pretty controversial, Elon, who speaks for a big group of very wealthy business
Sure.
people, and he's saying, I don't see college as
Sure.
necessary because in every situation,
Hmm.
because you got some people who are only going to learn one way and they're
Yeah.
only interested in one thing. However, we're forcing them to take all this
Sure.
other. I think there's some changes that need to be made there in the way we do it, and that's a very tricky thing because
Oh,
we're
sure.
dealing with our future.
Yeah.
And we got a good example of that recently.
Hmm.
Well, when I say recent, 5 years ago with COVID,
Hmm.
we had in my opinion, a somewhat of a social experiment
Oh,
there.
100%. It was a really interesting conversation for sure.
Yeah,
Of how that engaged
and that was a social experiment that had some big consequences with the current
their development. Yeah.
those child guys that were in their development age right then when they were learning how to have a
Hmm.
conversation, how to interact with people,
Yeah.
and we're seeing it. My wife is a and this is confusing to a lot of people. I did a podcast. I think it's the last one we had up with her. She's a streamer. She streams video games.
Gotcha.
And when she started it out, and I talked about this a few times, she's very pretty, young, and I'm like, oh, she's like, going to do this because her brothers. And I'm like, okay, I don't really get it, but okay. And then I like to research things, and I'm like, oh, okay, I get it now. It's
Yeah.
pretty girl, plays video games, crisscross applesauce and all that. I was like, okay, whatever. I will say the first week or two of that was very hard for me
Sure.
because I was
Yeah.
like, oh, wait a minute. Did he just say what I think he said
Yeah.
on
The
that
fan
chat?
service is
Yeah, and then I'm like,
understandably
well,
weird.
if he's saying that in the chat, what's he messaging? And then, well, what's she messaging? I went through that whole thing. But anyhow, further on it, I realized what we and she enjoys it. She's really good at it. But explaining that to different people. But then looking at that chat, and I'm like, this is where they're all at.
Hmm.
This is where that COVID
Hmm.
generation ended up. They don't know how to go out to the ball games or to, the clubs or any of those things where they would interact with one another. This is how they've learned to interact because I'm looking at the chat and that's what it's about. It's not the game.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily how pretty the girl is. It's in this situation.
Yeah.
There
Sure.
are
Sure.
some
Sure.
of
Sure.
those
Sure.
other
Sure.
websites,
Sure. Sure.
but it's that conversation going
Yeah.
on over there. And that was a social experiment that I think made that happen. So I'm really concerned that I really do believe that our education system needs to change. However, we're gambling with our future
Hmm.
and these people and these young people's lives.
Yeah. Now I will say that like the Twitch stream chat channel style and whatnot was obviously there before COVID, right? Like in the way that
I agree.
engaged.
I agree.
Yeah. So like Reddit forums and other engagements. There used to be 4chan and like some other back channels of how people used to do that. I will say that it definitely seemed during COVID that school systems were worried about the impact that being at home and the stress of having everybody at home was. So they didn't want to stress them out with the education system. So it did seem very easy,
Pulled back. Yeah.
pulled back, right? And so like that was a concern for the rigor that we were putting forward. Obviously, the concern was mental health and long form conversations. We now have a better understanding of that. But like in terms of education, I definitely think that like means testing, like KSA testing and end of year testing and stuff like that is only beneficial for kids that do well with testing. Um, I will let you know that like from the state level on standards, they preach diversification so hard on trying to make sure that all of your projects and all of your classwork has 8 to 10 different ways in which kids can engage with it, and that you're supposed to like adhere all that. What I find is really interesting is they expect the teacher to come up with and disseminate the majority of that information
Yeah.
for the pay scale that they're trying to insinuate, right? And that's really interesting. There's a lot of extra work, especially on new teachers, to come up with a whole system that's supposed to work for 180 days, out of the year, and it's got to keep up with
For the entire group of kids.
for like 6 different classes. You know what I
Right.
mean? And so like that has to, and we again, for better or for worse, we don't do as much ability grouping. We more immerse that because showcasing underperforming kids as the failing class. You know what I mean? Like, oh, we're in the dumb class reinforces that and showcases how those kids that they don't want to be in school or that the school's intentionally trying to leave them behind. So now that we integrate like most of the classes together from the highest to lowest level kids in those classes, you're seeing high level kids not being challenged as much because like obviously we're trying to teach
Keep
like
them all in one
we're
group.
trying to teach them all in one group, and that's a level of equity for sure. But there also needs to be ways in which those kids can be challenged, and we're going to learn how that works. I'm sure some states are doing better than others in that engagement. It's it's really unfortunate. I mean, again, like so, the first year my wife taught, she taught history and math at one of the schools nearby, and she was happy, not like happy, but she was okay with like giving out failing grades to sixth graders and seventh graders that weren't just
Mhm.
doing the work. And during parent teacher conference, it's out the door. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
with people lined up, upset that their kids aren't doing well, not understanding it, even though there's an online portal for you to view your kids' grades, what they've turned in, how what the responses are on those assignments. And so like I'm definitely noticing like a level of parental engagement. I have just as much a problem with that. I just trust that the teachers probably are doing better at my kids' daycare than I probably would be doing at home, teaching them nursery
Multiple things.
rhymes
Right.
and their one, two, threes and all that kind of stuff. Like when we come home, we hang out, we have a good time. I pay for my kid to go to a daycare because I need them to have 8 hours of good, solid education. And then we come home and we have fun. You know what I
Right.
mean? And that's again like the conversation about like homework. Like, right, like kids are doing so much nowadays. There's so much like alternative stress and family stress. We can see across the United States that like the majority of families just are struggling in one way or another. So adding that on as a mandatory requirement for a lot of systems is hurtful to families, and families that want to push their kids can give their kids extra work. They can give their kids things to work on that, hopefully they've
Sure.
instilled a level of care about education into the system. What I really notice is that a lot of people like say like when we went to the Common Core method conversation on math, right? It was a little confusing, especially to some teachers and then a lot of parents in the way that like what are we trying to do and like why are we trying to do like why are we putting all these dots in different boxes. It's like, well, we're getting your kid ready for calculus
Right.
in second grade. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it looks weird, but like just let them do the work and it'll be okay. But like then they were trying to teach them ways to cheat that. You know what
Right.
I mean? And so like they're teaching them that like, oh well, the teacher doesn't know what they're talking about.
Sure.
And like the system doesn't know what it's talking about. And you should just not really care about this like educational paradigm. And then I have friends who are high school teachers and they talk about like when they go to the state testing, the kids are like texting each other and they're like, this test don't matter. It's not
Right.
going to be on our grades.
Yeah.
So like nobody care about it. You know what I mean? And so they're bombing the test halfway on purpose. And
And
then we're like, oh, the scores suck. And it's like, well, yeah, like, because there's no incentive structure because we don't like education for education's sake is not incentivized, as well as the fact that like the education system for a child nowadays, that's your job. If you go and get an education and become a good adult, that was your job as a kid. The rest of it's fun and games and whatnot. And some kids have more responsibilities than others, and that's for sure. But like, it's interesting how much they think of it as like a chore and not the like the
Responsibility.
well the government and society are paying for you to join us. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like slowly but surely, year after year. Like we want you to be a part of us as best as possible. Just take it seriously. And that's a hard system to like force. You can't force that. You know what I
No.
mean? But like we
We
just
sure
don't do.
try. We sure
Yeah,
try.
yeah. But we don't do a good job of incentivizing that kind of behavioral structure in kids as they develop, to really understand why things are important. My kid was watching just some YouTube and things like that. But he was using like bruh in language. He's 4.5. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
he was using that kind of stuff. And I was like, well, we don't talk like that. And he's like, oh, is it a bad word? I'm like, no, but it's just not proper conversational language.
Yeah.
You can say that to your best friend, but you probably don't say it to your grandmother. You
Sure.
know what I mean? And he's 4.5, so yeah, every once in a while he would say it again. But now when he says, he goes, "Oh, I'm sorry," because he's self monitoring himself because he notices not that it's bad or that I'm going to get on to him,
Mhm.
but that when we're having a proper conversation with people that utilize the right language, that's how we behave.
Sure.
And a lot of times I see this happen a lot. Like, you'll tell your kid to take out the trash like at 4 or 5 or 6 or 7, like real young ages. But like you'll be like, throw the trash away. You'll tell them probably 10 times, and then sometimes parents get upset that their kid doesn't understand. Well, it probably takes 100 times of your kid doing something to really
Sure.
integrate it into their psyche of how they engage. So like we really should take a more long form approach that like when you start seeing issues arise at 4, they're probably going to keep happening till they're 5.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you have to take a step back and realize that they're not doing it to antagonize you. You know what I
You
mean? Like
as
like
a parent, you should be there to help remind and
yeah.
remind, and then eventually.
Well, and so like again going back historically, like we were talking about, like in the early 1900s, like we were supposed to deny kids affection because their craving for your love will cause them to behave. And so like parents would intentionally not tell their kids that they loved them
Yeah.
and not like engage in those emotional development schemes. And we're seeing kind of a revert to that now where we think like, this like hyper masculinity structures and like certain paradigms are important to the way we engage. Like I'm wearing a pastel colored shirt. This doesn't make me any less manly of a system.
Tristan, make sure you don't change that color like I told you to.
That's so
'Cause
funny.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, no.
But I was watching, and again, not to go left and right on like media, but like I was watching Jesse Waters, and he was saying that if you lean forward or cross your legs, you're feminine.
Yeah.
And I was just like, well, that's just a sitting preference. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah, gets
I
off.
don't put a wallet in my back pocket because it's bad for your back health.
Right.
But so many men feel like that's like how their system should be set up, and that's great. That's good for you. I like how you want to behave for yourself. I think everybody should
Yeah.
be able to utilize their American liberties to exhibit themselves the exact way they want, as long as it's not harming another individual and
Mhm.
you're an adult. You know what I mean? Like it just
Well, I will agree with you there for
yeah.
sure. Because Phil Robertson just passed away, the Duck Dynasty guy,
Mhm.
and he had some really good things to say, about how to find peace and things like that.
Mhm.
But he was also very, very adamant about if you want to have a good life and you want to do this, you do life like me.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and I disagree with that because there's several people. I mean, just people have
Sure.
different interests. Some
Oh
people
yeah.
like a black car. Some people want a red car. Some people like to play video games. Some people
Yeah.
like to watch podcasts.
Yeah.
And to expect everyone to be like you is just somewhat hypocritical.
Yeah.
And now my hypocrisy runs deep. I will say that.
It's okay. We're all
you know,
guilty of it, and I think it's
uh,
the goal is
yeah,
understanding that like, we're on a journey,
yeah.
and that you can't be judging people for not being in the exact space you are.
I try not to. I'll be out. My wife will want to go out, and I'll be like, "Well, you're wearing those Crocs, and I don't go out in public with anybody wearing Crocs. You might catch me out back doing yard work, or the whole, you got to put some pants on because you're wearing pajamas, and
Mm-mm.
we don't go out.
Mm-mm.
So I do have my things, but I'm not gonna push that to a point of where I say someone's, you
Yeah.
know, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we have to make our own choices, and there's different people. Um, I do see. So when we talk about that hard times and soft men and all that, I do hope that we as a country are prepared for something that if there was an issue. Now
Mm-hmm.
you can get into conspiracy
Sure.
theories and
Yeah.
end of the
Yeah.
world and doomsdayers. Let's go dig a hole
Sure.
and bury ourselves. But at the same time, things can change
Oh
and
yeah.
shift, and we need to
Hardcore.
have, we have. I guess the perfect word I guess I would say would be pluck.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the day, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but
Yeah.
he's got some pluck about him.
Yeah.
He'll
Some
get up and
gusto.
yeah,
Yeah.
he, and that's where I think our leadership needs to be as well. And so
Yeah.
some of the reason, I mean, you have to have pluck about you
Mm-hmm.
because when you really do disagree with me,
Mm-hmm.
I want you to come back at me.
Yeah.
I want you to say, no, I'm not going to just because I'm sitting here in your building, I'm not going to go along with that. I
Yeah.
disagree with it. Now I understand your points and I understand why you maybe were at.
Yeah.
I do think we need more of that, some
Mm-hmm.
more backbone.
Sure.
Okay, there,
Yeah.
not in just masculine in men, but in as a whole.
Sure.
And I think we're also seeing again, we're going back to I see the other countries are looking at
Mm-hmm.
us and they're seeing two countries
Mm-hmm.
now divided. We're not as big as we used to be. Now we're half as big you
Yeah.
know and at the same time they're looking at things that signs that we are not as strong as we used to be. I was at my one of my kids graduation the other day, and I'm not military.
Mm-hmm.
I respect the military. I'm
Oh, for
glad
sure.
we got it, and I think it's a necessary thing,
Mm-hmm.
but I think there was 3 out of her class that were going into the military.
Hmm.
Tristan, can you look up and see what how many enlist young people have enlisted this year or previous year versus 10 or 20 years ago? Because I think you were seeing a huge decline in that. So now we're looking at we're
Yeah,
looking out there and we're seeing,
sure.
countries are looking at us. Okay, now they're half as strong as they were. Now their
Hmm.
military isn't here, and we're declining in that ability
Yeah.
to not only lead the world in our ideas, but to protect our own self. So what you got there? 2024, you had 146 in 2005. Is that right? Am I reading that right, Tristan? 1.14 million enlisted
I was
active.
looking at something else.
Okay.
Looks like it's a 0.59 increase from 2018.
Yeah. Okay. Well, really, what my point is I think if you would go into research and do comparisons, I think we're seeing a dramatic loss of young people
Sure.
in listening,
Yeah.
as well as people moving into what you're doing, campaigning, because they're like, it's too much.
Oh
Why
yeah.
would? And there's so many more advantages out there.
Well, and that's the big goal, I think, and what we need to be focusing on going forward is that like we are not engaging in the morale structure of why people want to be in the military. We don't look at like so there's a whole bunch of non-combat roles that people can engage in, right? That
I would,
don't
I would say more,
Oh,
probably more than there are
way
combat.
more than combat roles, right? So people can engage in the military without having to be in active combat duty, right? So there are very good jobs and systems inside of the military that are promotable to a vast array of individuals. I think the big issue is that, like for my generation growing up, we have always heard about the dollar spent, the quarter spent on VA affairs, right?
Mm.
We've seen all of the Wounded Warrior videos that come across the thing asking for donations to help support those individuals, which means that like us as a country are not supporting those individuals to the fullest extent of their conversation. Um, Talking about active duty military, right? Like when you talk about like BAH funding, right? When we talk about housing and assistance, there are bases all over the United States that have black mold in their housings, right? That need additional housing. That the conversation of movement stipends and the rate of movement, right? I know families that have moved 25 times. You know what I mean? Like that's just not where a lot of people are nowadays. Historically, when factories started opening up in the north, a lot of Southerners moved north. When the West opened up, people moved west, right? People don't particularly travel so much for their space. They deal with the environments that they're in a lot more now than, they're like, oh, I'm a Chicago native. They're probably still in Chicago a lot of times. If they're like a lot of the West Kentucky people I know, besides probably the most hardcore liberals, right? Like usually stay around. You know what I mean? Unless they just feel like they don't belong at all, or they have some big opportunity that breaks free of this rural area. Um, or is not available here, right? That they want to do. Most people stay kind of where they're at, and so like the lack of opportunity and systems is really important, and how that they engage.
Yeah, well, I think too on that, technology has done that as well.
Yeah,
I mean, you can do a lot of things
yeah.
you couldn't do in Kentucky
Well,
now that you could have done in other
Well,
areas now.
showcasing like why areas like ours or like Appalachia region would be great for promoting and incentivizing remote work,
Yeah,
right? Like you could have entire economies boom off of pay coming from a job in California, pay coming from a job in Maine, pay from a job in Florida, coming to our areas. Same thing with like having a conversation on like high speed rail. If Appalachian region had ways to get people to Lexington and Louisville for work and home at the end of the day, that whole area could boom. You know what I mean? Like it's so much of it's a beautiful space with the vibrant people. And we're just not willing to invest the conversational capital and the dollars to bring up, marginalized groups like that are just kind of placed out of the wayside because of like their just geographical
yeah,
area,
right.
but like Kentucky's so primely placed
Yeah,
for like everything. We're within 600 miles of like most of the population. You know what I
yeah.
mean? Like it's
Especially the location we're at, we're kind of a central point of a
oh
lot of
yeah.
larger areas.
Yeah, huge interstates come through our space. You
Sure.
know what I mean? And it's very accessible compared to other spots. So I'm hoping that we see that kind of boom going forward. And again, like I just think that the level of technology and stuff, if we properly utilize it and we incentivize its growth, is going to have a huge impact in rural America
Yeah.
as more people become more technologically advanced.
So
So
I'm going to give out a kind of a free commercial here. I kind of, sort of. I met you, or I was encouraged to bring you on the podcast by a mutual friend of ours, Chip Toller.
hmm
He owns Patty's Restaurant, and he is the perfect example of growing a rural
oh
area
yeah,
into a very industrial area.
hmm
Grand Rivers, Kentucky, where his restaurant is, and now pretty much a lot of business there.
yeah,
You know, there's a 300 people there, bringing in over 300,000 people a year
yeah,
to that restaurant, and he's grown it into bed and breakfast and other
yep,
things, and really shown how to that rural areas are no longer isolated. And he did that in a time when he didn't have all the technology that we
hmm
have now that you could bring in people.
yeah,
And just this conversation you and I are having, we're sitting here in a body shop in Keble, Kentucky.
yeah.
You know, probably, I don't even know the population on you. Tristan, can you pull that up on Keble? But it's not even, they may not, definitely not 300. But we're able to do this, and there will be people see this. We're growing our channel, and I've had people from multiple areas comment on it. And then you go,
575.
oh well, we beat Grand Rivers. How about that? Then you go to even a smaller place, Barlow, where I live,
hmm
and they called it Barlow. Some people jokingly say they called it Barlow because they didn't want to set the bar too high. But Barlow, and there's, my wife's in the basement in the middle of nowhere,
Yeah.
streaming to people in
Yeah.
Australia and Canada and all over. So, with those abilities, there is no such thing as just isolation
Oh
anymore. We
yeah.
should be able to grow a community and a commerce
Because
wherever we are.
what you do here and what she does there brings in income that is then spent locally.
Sure,
You know what I mean? And if we can build up the conversation of us spending that money at a local business rather than spending it at a Walmart, right?
sure.
Which again, like I hate to say those conversations because like in Benton, the Walmart there provides a lot of jobs, right? And they give a lot of money out and they do a lot of things. But if they supply 400 jobs and that business wasn't there, it would take 1,000 jobs to make up for the conversation, right? It
Yeah.
have much more middle management and small business ownership across the scale of what they were providing
Right.
than for this system. But like the convenience factor, I think is a big issue in American culture. We've chosen convenience a lot of times over our American liberties. We've chosen them over our manufacturing and organizational jobs. Now, like I think that it's kind of silly to like we're obviously not arguing for like shoe and shirt factories to particularly come back in mass to the
Mhm.
United States, but like we need to be taking over the world in terms of like medical equipment, science technology, the things that we can sell back to people for big profit margins that they need, right? Is the goal. They sell us their raw materials or their, the easy to construct like factory
Mhm.
systems. We build the futures of tomorrow that we send other places. You know what I mean? And like that's the goal, but like I think a lot of times we have special interests that want specific interactions to keep occurring, and they create a conversation or a scheme or a slogan that pulls against that growth. Um, Same thing with talking about like automation and AI, right? Pete Buttigieg was on a different podcast and he was talking about how if we implemented a technology tax dividend for those companies that utilized automation and we gave that directly back to the American people, then it wouldn't be just a few people or a few businesses that were profiting off of that. The American people would profit off of AI solutions and automation, right? Like as a
Yeah.
dividend back directly into your pocket for what these big companies are doing globally because automation is going to come. The goal is that we have a utopia where if you wanted to do your podcast as your life's work,
Yeah.
you have the economic freedom and the availability to sit there and do that, right? But there's a floor in which you are protected from falling through that the least of us, those who just like, it's interesting because like in the past, like far off in the past, like we have all kinds of philosophers and writers and poets and everything that they were just the daydreamers of the world, right? And like, not saying like everybody needs to be that, and like we don't
No,
want that, but we want some people to be the daydreamers.
just like
For me, like do that for
exactly.
me. Enjoy that life so
And
that I
for
can do mine. I want to work. You know what I mean? I like doing the politics. I would do the politics even if it didn't come for any money. You know what I
right,
mean? But some people, like my dad, he runs a business and he wouldn't need to go out there and work on boat docks or help out at the campground. He likes being out there doing the work. He's going to do the work regardless. You know what I mean? So like we should like talk about how work is important for work's sake, how it builds character and why it's engaging and important to be at. But like that monetary reason, like the chasing of the almighty dollar, shouldn't be why you get out of bed in the morning. That's a crazy conversation to get into, especially in America, which is apparently the richest country in the
yeah,
entire world. And we have 200,000 people who are consistently unsheltered, in the United States. There's
crazy.
14 million people unsheltered in Mexico,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like, I
Yeah,
mean, there's a humanitarian crisis happening in Mexico that is occurring based off probably a lot of bad policy decisions in the 50s through the 80s and the American government dealing with, communism and other conversations that we were dealing with at the times. And now we have all this development that's happening south of the border. And what do we do in the sense of like helping people attain a level of self determination and dignity that they deserve as humans, you know what I mean? While at the same time protecting our national interests and our jobs and our conversations, making sure that America is still the kind of place that we want to engage in, and it has the same like this not culture that's homogenized, but this culture that's diverse and understanding and um breeds like this American like style of exceptionalism that we can promote, right? When America says that it wants to be first at the expense of other people,
yeah.
we do have a problem. I'm not saying that we don't want to be first. I mean, it's cool to be the shining light on the hill, but like I want to be the good guys all the time, not the other guys.
Right.
And that becomes a problem, especially when things happen in the country. Remember after 9/11, a lot of people were talking about how we were going to deal with terrorists
It
and
was
how we were going to protect people,
ridiculous.
and
Some of
and
it.
a lot of it was harmful to the way that we describe things, not because we weren't willing to protect Americans, but because we were willing to harm other people to do so. And that just showcases like that we were losing some of that like edge, right? Like you said, like that pluck to be the good guys. And
Yeah.
and like in every movie we watch, the good guys get hurt. You know what I mean? And that's
That's a very
unfortunately
good point.
the conversation. It's going to
Yeah.
continue to happen to us over and over again.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Are
So
you good?
yeah, I'm great.
Well,
Yeah.
Tristan will have to be good for a little longer because you just threw out a whole bunch of stuff right
Oh,
there.
that's so
No,
funny.
no. So,
Yeah,
I'm gonna try to hit on a few of them. For
sure.
one thing, you were talking about the dreamers.
Yeah.
We need dreamers,
Mhm.
and for the dreamers to understand or to expect everyone else to believe to understand that we need dreamers, they also have to understand we need warriors.
Yeah.
We need every and for the warrior, we have to understand that we need the person over here.
Yeah.
We
The
can't
worker, the farmer,
we can't live as Spartans.
Mhm.
This is Sparta.
Yeah. And we'll just take everything in
I
this
think
one
I would
nest
feel
and
I would work. I would do better there. But
yeah.
just saying,
Yeah.
definitely don't have the physique for it. But we have to understand, and I really try hard to my own personal is to understand that situation.
Mhm.
We need this as a whole,
Yeah.
especially bringing up children in this world. I have certain things that I want to instill in them. That
Mhm.
these are things that I believe in. I'm not saying this is how you have
Right.
to, but find your own way. Um, so I think that's important. We all tend to fall into that though,
Yeah. Oh,
and
100%. It's really difficult.
those young kids, they don't know a day's work.
Yeah.
What is it? One of my favorite quotes from John Wayne was, if you're not smart, you better have a strong back.
Yeah.
Well, but at least he acknowledged that if you were smart, you didn't have to have a strong
Yeah.
back.
No, 100%.
Um, so that's important. I think everyone needs to take a step back and look at that when they start making those judgments
Yeah.
on everyone else.
Well, and it's like so again, I've wanted to I was Abraham Lincoln in my fourth grade play,
Yeah.
right? When we were like, what person do you want to be when you grow up? I've always liked politics and community service and that engagement, but I know that this area respects and understands the value of hard work. I've had multiple opportunities to work out in different states, in different places, and I've chosen to work building boat docks for
Yeah.
relatively meager pay and no benefits. You know what I mean? In the worst weathered conditions, pretty much, for 18 years now.
That's
Same
a lot.
job. I mean,
Sure.
different roles and whatnot, but same job. Always family business. And because I think it's a respectable way of building that catharsis that you need to relate to people in that system. Again, like I've been on every inch of the lake.
Yeah.
If there was a moment or a sunset that was going to change someone's life, I promise you, I've
You've been
seen it
there.
in terms of Kentucky. You know what I mean? And so,
Right.
like, I want to bring that feeling and that ideology there of of the peace that we can have if we trust each other and we work towards transparency in systems um, to everybody's life. I think I've had a great relative life. I mean, I'm sure we've all had hardships, and I've had hardships, but like they're not even worth talking about in that regard.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I've had a good life, and I want other people to experience that. And I think that, like, again, showcasing the hard work. If I went and been a lawyer, and done all thinking jobs the whole time, they'd have a conversation to say about that. But then you go and you do hard manual labor the entire time, and they're like, "Well, why are you qualified to run for the office?" And it's just
Yeah.
like, I can be smart and have a strong back
Yeah.
about the
Yeah.
conversations. I intentionally want to do that. Like, I intentionally like that, and the freedom that comes from what I do, not being like I don't have an
Not
employer
tied
standing on the
down.
back. I mean, like, I've never seen an OSHA safety guy.
Yeah.
Nobody cares what dock builder's
Shh,
doing.
shh, shh. We don't talk about OSHA.
There's just like there's nobody around my
Yeah.
space. I got like me and two employees, and you don't ever see nobody.
Yeah.
So it's really freeing in that regard, and so
Yeah.
I hope that everybody can feel that level of freedom that I've had the chance to experience. So yeah.
Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to bring
Mm-hmm.
up is you were talking, we are becoming global,
Mm-hmm.
and I often this is something that irritates me. There's a show. I go back to my movie thing, Jaws. I don't,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So in the, oh no, I'm sorry, talking. That's a different. I'm talking the Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and they're trying. So this situation. I'm just going to explain it really quickly. There's a group of people who think they've seen this UFO. So they're all sitting at this conference with some leaders,
Yeah.
and trying to convey their point. And as they're back and forth, and there was a pretty valid comment made by one of the guys, and everybody's starting to get ready to. And at that time, someone stands up and he says, "In 1973, I come across uh, a Bigfoot, with a foot spanning, and he spreads out this thing, and then immediately everyone shuts down and everyone starts to laugh. Well, there's a saying that says, "I'd rather have an intelligent enemy than an idiot for an ally."
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So I will agree with people on some of these foreign policies and that this was done wrong and we need to take action. But then you have these people that say, "Oh, just bomb the whole damn place."
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just nuke the whole place. I'm like, okay, obviously I can't believe that you actually believe that. And
Sure.
if you do, I go to this thing called your back door.
Yeah.
So, I'm going to protect my back door.
Mm-hmm.
If my neighbor has a problem, I'm probably going to go over there. If somebody in Kevel, I'm probably and Paducah, but where is your back door end?
Sure.
Are these people across this ocean?
Mm-hmm.
Is that where it ends?
Yeah.
These are no longer people. These are no
Mm-hmm.
longer the same. And there's people there that have I would say the majority of them have nothing to do with what the decisions are being made at the top level. These are
Yeah.
people
About
down
their
here.
lives.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
washing dishes. Their moms are getting kids ready to,
Yeah.
they there was nothing that they had contributed to terrorism. They have
Yeah.
nothing that contributed to these things yet. Our solution is wipe out the
Yeah.
whole place.
Well, it's like looking at the conversation of Operation Maximum Pressure on Iran, right? Which obviously set goals in mind about denuclearization and goals on their government, but it also instilled a higher humanitarian crisis for the individuals on the ground because we were barring certain groups from
Yeah,
engaging with NGO operations, right, in
right.
that country, and there was no off ramps for Iran to get out of their situation after they've done anything. So they ended up just kind of not caring about what we did and said because, like, where other stipulations had given certain off ramps or conversations to showcase that they had been changing their mind because they are a country. I mean, like there's kinds of stipulations you have to take. Um, Again, like you said, like the people on the ground level who are just doing their daily work and trying to exist are being dehumanized by people like us who have a very good life and the ability and the privilege to talk about their lives
Yeah,
like that, right? Like,
exactly.
like they don't think about us like that at all, because they don't have it's the hierarchy of needs, right? Like they don't have that
I
the
I
capability.
might remove
Excuse me.
this from the podcast, But I saw a video recently in Palestine where a bunch of people were at a food bank or something, and somehow a bunch of them got killed. And almost every comment was they deserve it. I'm glad that they died,
Yeah.
and it was like really disturbing.
And,
There's no reason to
well, and
to remove that for sure.
we can have
That's the exact point we're trying to make.
yeah, and we can talk about like obviously the issues of Hamas and the conversations historically that have happened between
We
Israel
could
and things like
get
that.
off, and
But I mean I don't mean
I
that. I just
do.
meant like in the goal of like self
Yeah,
determination and humanism.
I want to get off on those things. I'd
mm-hmm.
like to have you back,
Oh yeah,
maybe.
that'd be
Because I mean, the
great.
further down the road you get,
Sure,
you're
yeah.
maybe we grow, you grow, we all
Mm-hmm.
grow together. However, my main point was here was if you're going to reach across
Mm-hmm.
to someone and say that you agree,
Mm-hmm.
kind of in a similar way that I would agree with you on certain things.
Yeah.
But if I reach across and I say, okay, yeah, you're right, we need to bomb the whole damn place. Okay, you just lost that.
Yeah.
What we've been talking about this whole time is our country has to come together,
Mm-hmm.
and talking and saying things. So I am 100% that you should get your point across, and there are things that should be taken care of, and some of those things take extreme actions. But if you're going to get people on your side that are
Yeah.
thinking logically,
Consensus.
you
Yeah.
got to you can't come out there and say those things. That's just not
Yeah.
that's not going to promote anything. You're
No.
just going to continue to go
Yeah,
separate directions.
and we can have like you can make a statement and it not be the best version of the way that that's supposed to come out.
Yeah,
Like we're speaking very free form here.
exactly.
I'm not expecting every one of my sound bites to have sounded perfect tonight,
Sure.
right?
And we
And
don't want them to.
and we don't want them
Right.
to. But like if after this someone took a clip and they said this had happened and this was an issue, and then I realized that like, oh yeah, that was a bad way to word that statement or that conversation. Both I would happily apologize for the way that it's affected people because the impact is more important than the intent. You know what I mean of your
Absolutely.
statements. And secondly, I'd work to learn what we're doing to improve that conversation going forward. Because like I can
And you
always
could
be
also clarify.
yeah, and I can
You
also
know,
clarify to that conversation the goal and the issue that I find big like that affects most of us is that when that happens, we immediately shut down on like those people are terrible people and they're liars and they never believed what they were saying they believed to begin with. And it's just like we're losing the fact that they're on their journey now again as a straight white man of privilege in that conversation. Historically, you should probably take me with as much, as far as you can throw me. I mean, but
but there again,
I'm here
we're
to learn, and that's
generalizing.
why I keep admitting that I'm here to learn. Is that like I obviously don't understand a lot of the scenarios and differences of marginalized communities,
Yeah.
and so I'm here for you in the sense that I'm always willing to learn. Am I willing to probably have a conversation about like steps that we can take as a country to move forward where probably people of those marginalized communities would like a faster route? 100, probably 100%. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because I have the privilege to make those concessions without personal harm or detriment. Does that mean that like we're still not all moving forward in a positive way? And I hope other people are making the rest of that argument. And I'm hoping people are making the detraction to that argument and that we can all have a big consensus of conversation together. Yeah. I hope that people bring up competing arguments with facts, reason, and logic as to why they don't believe what we're talking about and that we
Right.
can really come to a conclusion. Like, I agree that today we're probably not going to get everything we want. But if we get one thing by the end of the year that we care about done each time,
Yeah.
and we all believe that we're trying our best, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, I, and this is an interesting part. Like, again, I've been in politics for a long time, like on the ground, but like, I always try to, at least for the mental gymnastics of it, believe that what politicians are bringing up and talking about, they earnestly care about, and it's not a point of corruption as to why they're talking about it, just for the benefit of the doubt that I'm hoping other people will give me.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like in the sense that like I don't want people to immediately think that like I have some kind of nefarious needs, which means that I'm not going to look at the other side of the aisle and say immediately like, oh, that's super nefarious and that's awful and evil, and they're only doing that for their own personal enrichment.
Yeah.
If they are and it comes out that they are, then that's the case that it is, and I hope that like both sides always adhere to and or like see justice if it's necessary. I don't support any Democratic candidates or political officials who have committed crimes that we commit them like that we prove against them. Right. I also don't think that we need to be going on the war path and telling people that they did crimes they didn't do. And never coming up with a crime to commit somebody of and just keeping up the conversation. So like both things are concurrent, but we
Yeah.
we definitely have to have a level of decorum in the way that we treat each other and see each other as humans
Absolutely.
that's beneficial.
I think that's the thing that you and I probably agree on the most, and we didn't really get off on a lot of policy that necessarily are controversial.
Sure.
I
No,
don't think
I think
most
so.
everything we talked about was a general something that we all want. Maybe we have different ways of getting there.
Hmm.
But one thing that I think you and I agree on totally is that we need to come together and we
Yeah.
need to do this as a nation,
Yeah.
a whole nation, and find ways to reach across and shake hands and agree. And
Yeah.
sometimes agree to disagree, but
Yeah.
still make that move forward as a whole nation. Because again, I can't keep iterating this enough. The other nations, the world is watching us,
Yeah.
and they're seeing these
No.
weaknesses. And the weaknesses don't necessarily play a factor of the Gen Z being
Hmm.
a weaker person. The weaknesses are that we're divided, and
Yeah.
we're two nations if we don't make some changes quick. I
Oh,
think.
100%. It's definitely other countries are making moves to make other partners,
Yeah,
right? They're looking at China. They're
yeah,
looking at India.
yeah,
They're looking at even Saudi Arabia for a lot of the Middle Eastern conversations that we're having, or African areas, right? They're moving into other areas for economic trade, for safety and securities, and we have, if we're going to continue in that conversation, and I'm not saying that we need to be the world police on every single thing that occurs, but if we're wanting to be a world leader and a guiding light in what we need to do, we have to stop eating our own in the
right.
conversations that we're having, and that doesn't mean Democrats in primaries and Republicans in primaries, like infighting and arguing or whatever. But that means like when we get up there as the person that's elected or the person that's running for office, like we need to give everybody a good chance of the conversation. We need to assume that people are coming at it for the right reasons and for the right times. And if we support them from the ground level up, then they won't have to take monies. And when they do take monies, we should all care about that. It shouldn't be a football game. Well, my candidate does this, and the opponent's candidate over in that state over there did something bad.
Hmm.
So it's all fine. That's just the way it is.
Yeah,
I've heard that so many times. Like we've talked about so many cool issues and ways to address conversations. They're not all the way going to solve everything, but they might alleviate some issues. Um, but people are like, well, that's never going to pass, or you're never going to get everybody to do that. I'm like, well, you're never going to get anything
yeah,
if you don't put the people up there who really care about that, or who are saying like I would at minimum do 6 town halls a year, and before the holidays you should do an expert roundtable with at least like 20 members of like high level positions in like education and business and community service that like sit around and tell you why the policies and advocacies that you went with were harmful. You know what I mean? That way, when we go into Thanksgiving and Christmas, everybody's got
got something
all
to
these
talk about.
people
Yeah,
that really got a chance to say, well, our district said this, and the neighboring district's person said this about what's happening over there. And like we have all this other data that's not just coming from a mouthpiece of news media, and it's not just coming from the statesperson or the politician themselves. It's coming from you can see
yeah,
people that you trust in the community having opinions that matter. You know what I mean? And like everybody always looks at these town halls and you see people yelling at the representative. Well, they don't believe the representative's listening, or they wouldn't be yelling. Like they wouldn't be having
yeah.
that kind of argument if people felt like they were being heard. Like you need to be
That's the
seen.
thing. Yeah,
And like so, I think that younger people are going to be able to come to the table with a buttload more empathy
yeah,
for everybody else. And I think that again, like those soft skills that we've been teaching are going to like have a fruition moment in that regard.
hmm,
And from then, we can work on making people more resilient. You know
sure.
what I mean? Like I'm interested in the dialogue of how we took like firearms training and safety stuff out of schools, right? And I think that that might have a positive or inquiry based look at like how that could help with the way that we perceive guns as a younger culture, right? And so like that's not really the left
Not at all.
viewpoint. Right, like
Not
it's
at
not
all.
that.
No, not at
Yeah, I
all.
mean that's not the left viewpoint, but I'd be interested in the studies and statistics.
To
Please,
see where that's
everybody
at.
here, change my mind on why things are better or worse. But like
Absolutely.
I'm open to all these conversations. At least in the interim, like I mean, 4-H still does a bunch of it, so
Yeah.
like we still have it in after school programs. We still have
Right.
it as a system. So it's just like why, isn't that available? And then again, we that would lead to again that rigor or that personal pluck that we have in our society about the way that we engage. Self-defense training could easily be a conversation. M- ben- Boosting up military benefits and systems so that people are like in low the problem with like the way that we advocate for military engagement is like a monetary thing, like get yourself out of poverty or get yourself put into college kind of aspect. And I feel like that preys on people in rural or poor communities, right?
Right.
Which isn't like a bad thing in the sense of national defense and conversations, but like in the way that we're trying to morale build those people to want to join. We have to come up with a solution and an availability of people to trust that like we're not going into countries and committing war crimes and you're now kind of guilty or by
A part of that.
association of that system. We have like a lot of people from my generation know what happened to the soldiers who came back from Vietnam
Yeah.
and
I
how
was
we
just
how we treated them, which was terrible, and they had nothing to do, the vast majority of them, with why they were being forced to go into those engagements because of the draft and the conversation. So like I can see where people are hesitant, but like we also can build up systems that promote them engaging in that, and promote the personal resiliency, right, to be a part of that system and to want to be a part of that system. Everybody should want to either like I'm a really big proponent of military service or AmeriCorps service as a stepping stone conversation as to how we pay for people's tuition to college. Right?
yeah.
If you don't think that you want to go into the military, going into AmeriCorps and working community service in impoverished areas for 4 years would be a great way of engaging in that.
Hmm.
And so and those people could help with offsetting military costs by being, nannies or being aid people or building houses in those spaces. And so like there's so much interconnectivity that we can get into that help step-based solve problems. A lot of people think like, oh well, we don't want people to get education systems for free. If they didn't earn it, I had to pay for mine. You should have to pay for yours, kind of thing. Well, again, let's open up some more conversations as to ways that they can pay for it today.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or can get money off of those systems. And then in the future, we can revisit what that looks like in the system of like, are we investing in the future of our economy by improving secondary post-secondary education,
Right.
like but like there's definitely things that we can do today that would improve things that are wholeheartedly bipartisan supported.
Yeah.
um
And it would be a great way for us
yeah, I
to
can't
reach across
yeah,
and
well,
start to
I
find
can't
out.
believe that we have people that go into like they want to be in like restaurants their whole lives.
Mhm.
That's not just like a high school job, right? Like some people want to be in restaurants their whole lives. We don't give them the opportunity to go to like community college to learn how to really do that job. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like that would be such a cool opportunity for like a 6-month course on like, all the cleanliness,
Yeah.
and like
What's to
how
be expected.
what's to be expected of your system as an
Yeah.
adult. Yeah, and it's just interesting. So,
Education in a whole.
yeah.
Sometimes I think that's the case that we don't really prepare for the day-to-day life.
No, yeah, yeah.
So we're going closer, going on about the 30-hour mark, which is way longer than we've ever went.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
And I'm glad that I had you on. We had a lot of great topics, but there's so many. This
Oh,
tells
yeah.
this conversation should tell people why we need to have more of these kind of
Yeah.
conversations. That when we look at these, 3-minute, 2-minute little pops of what the media is giving us,
Hmm.
that can be very
Yeah.
misleading because there's so much more that needs to be said. Because we've talked for almost 3 hours, and I've got about 1,000 other questions, and you've given me topics as
Yeah.
we went that I've wanted to hit. So I would encourage people to keep a look at that. I think we've seen that with the presidential election. I think that was greatly motivated by a podcast,
Hmm. No,
and
100%.
because there was an ability there to, when I saw that podcast, I was like, oof, oof, there's a couple of spots there. But then at the same time, I think in the beginning, when Trump was talking about going into one of the presidential rooms,
Hmm.
it really gave me a sense of, hey, this guy is really just,
Yeah.
he's a normal,
How he feels
he
about it.
really is a normal person there
Hmm.
somewhere, and
Yeah.
it brought that around. And I think that's why these are so important to have.
Yeah. You get
I
the
think if the
humanization.
I think if the other administration would have reached out, there may have been some differences there,
Hmm.
But who knows? So great conversation.
Yeah.
Really loved having you
Thank you
in.
so much.
I think it's going to spark a lot of things out there because I hope that the people that watch this give it an opportunity.
Sure.
Of
Yeah.
course, like I said, there's a lot of things that I would still like to talk about and things that before I would make a decision on who I'm
Yep.
going to be
And
voting
I would
for.
ask for people to do that as well, right?
Yeah.
Again, nobody should just take things at face value. I have a lot of Democratic supporters, and I wouldn't want them to vote for me or not put forth other primary candidates or other situations that they don't
Right.
believe in the conversation message that we're trying to adhere to.
Well, I would like to invite anybody who'd like to come
Mhm.
on here to reach out to me on either side because honestly, this is something I'd like to get out there, but at the same time, I have a lot of
Yeah,
questions myself. I like to understand things better.
yeah,
I told one of my kids, I was like, if I got to go to college right now and I didn't have to worry about paying bills and all that, I would love it. I love to
yeah,
just learn. I like to understand things better. So hopefully that continues on and good luck with getting your message out
yeah.
there.
Thank
So
you.
I hope you're able
Yeah,
to do that and maybe we reunite in a
sure.
few months and see where we're at. And I'll have a lot of different questions for you, and maybe
Please, yeah.
yeah. So, real quick, we will make sure we get all you. What's your website? We're gonna get that on there.
Williams4ky.com.
Okay, so Tristan will make sure we get that on there, and then you had some informational graphics on there.
Yeah, so
Can we?
I will have policy platform channels that will cover a plan of conversation, and then they'll have different like I call them micro bills,
Yeah,
and they form an omnibus conversation. So it's not one big bill; it's
right.
one big conversation individually. It would
Visually,
be nice if they passed together. They shore up the differences and the inequities that each one would then produce, right?
we may if you're
So
okay with that, Tristan will keep an eye out, and he
yeah,
will snag a few of those
yeah,
for the
please,
episode, put them in there so
yeah,
people can see what we're talking about. And I will we'll say one other thing. That I think what you're doing there might be a little easier and get your point across faster because I had talked to a tattoo artist
hmm
about getting a tattoo and I gave him this big long name. He's like, man, he says, you got a lot to say there, but you can say it so much more with just one picture.
yeah.
You know, your picture will tell
Oh,
people
it really
so much
does.
more. So we'll look at that too. And I'd like to get into some of your hobbies. And
Oh, sure.
when I looked into that, I was like, this is not who I was expecting, you
That's so
know.
funny.
And I
Yeah.
showed my son because you're into a lot of the things he's into.
Yeah.
So maybe next time we'll take a time to reach out and do
Sure. That'd be
that.
great.
And yeah, yeah, anyhow, great
Yeah.
conversation. Thanks a lot for coming
100%.
in.
Yeah, thank
And
you.
thanks, Mr. Toller, for
Yeah.
putting this together for us.
Yeah.
Uh,
Thank you so
good.
much.
I'll see you again soon.
All right. We'll do.
All right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Bye.
For sure.
What exactly happened down there?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I talked to him and blah, blah, blah. He asked about you guys and da 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 da. More questions, blah, blah, blah.